I remember the proposal like it was yesterday because I remember in my head, I was screaming no. And I just said, yes.
There's this thing in Mormonism that any two Mormons can make a marriage work if they're both righteous, right?
Yes. And I definitely took that to heart. I thought anything can be successful, so it's up to us. The most important thing on deciding who to marry was not how I felt about the person sexually, romantically. It was about, does God want me? Has he given me the sign to marry this person? I remember at that time not having those feelings for him, but I thought that was a good thing. I thought that was the sign from God. You'll be able to make it to the temple with this person.
I can stay pure with this person.
Exactly.
Because I'm actually, not attracted.
The church gives you a recipe for if things are not successful, then do ABC. And the idea was that if those things aren't working, then maybe there's a problem with you. Like I was the problem. Leaving the church gave me courage to start deciding who I was and what I wanted. And I realized when I left that I had never done that work.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about what it is to have a baby who's being born with a severe medical issue, because I think it's different than what people think. You can't mother your baby the way that you want to. I wasn't nursing her. I wasn't feeding her in any sort of way. I wasn't holding her. Trying to just make sure that she was feeling that connection with me so that she could be comforted was very, very stressful.
Yes. Oh, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
There's the saying, there's no atheists in foxholes, that when you're facing death, or in this case, death of a child, that's when you're going to be most inclined to want to cling to belief,
right?
Just as a coping mechanism.
I was surprised to feel that I had no ties to the church in my heart or my mind. None. I actually officially wrote to resign my membership while she was in the hospital. Because I was like, this is it. One of the greatest lessons I've learned since leaving Mormonism is trying to find comfort and being okay with not knowing. I can hope for so many things, but I don't know, and I have to find comfort in that. How I try to approach each day is I'm going to try my best today, and I'm going to try to make today a day that was worth living for me, for my children. Then if I get it tomorrow, I'm going to do that again. And I find comfort in that, living a life that way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Sean DeLynn. It's April 15th, tax day, 2025. Get your taxes in. Today we are going to be covering a couple very important and sensitive topics. One is silencing your voice and your self-knowledge in a high-demand religion, and figuring out how to find your voice and your self-knowledge. And then also, what do you do when you lose a child within a highly religious or religious transitional context? How do you deal with grief? How do you deal with healing and growth when something happens to you that for many is potentially the worst possible thing, which is losing a child? So that's what we're going to be covering. I'm here with my amazing partner and co-host, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hello.
And we have with us today, all the way from Austin, Texas, yeehaw.
Yeah.
Go Longhorns, hook 'em horns.
Yes.
We have Jennie Latham Johnson. Hey, Jennie.
Hi. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Margie and I went through your outline again this morning. We're so happy to have you, especially to talk about things that are so sensitive. We're also going to be talking about sexuality in a marriage, purity culture, and that whole sort of thing. And we just can't tell you how grateful we are that you'd come all the way from Texas, but also my home state, but also be willing to talk about some really hard stuff.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think it'd be fun to begin with your parents.
Yeah.
Because your parents have a fun meeting and your mom/conversion story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I always felt unique growing up because my parents were both converts to the church, and these were very important stories for me growing up. My mom grew up in London, England. I'm very proud of that. So I feel very much half British. And she converted at the age of 14. She had a really troublesome childhood growing up. Her parents were alcoholics. They were very neglectful. And she'll tell you that the church absolutely saved her. So at 14, they came. Missionaries came to her family. She felt like it was true, and she became a member of the church. It's interesting to me, having learned so much now about it, the fact that she's British and she joined the church at that time. But my dad was a little bit different. He grew up in Texas, so he's a native-born Texan, and he grew up Church of Christ, Bible Belt, very traditional, and he got into kind of a wild side, I guess, as he got older. He came to Austin, Texas. He went to University of Texas in the 60s and early 70s. If you know anything about that, he was pretty wild. He was a little hippie, I guess. He sold his sports car that his dad had bought him for a VW bus. He had really long hair. And during this time, he just really lost himself. He was searching for something, and he found the church. I mean, Austin, Texas during that time was crazy. It was the way he explains it. Honestly, he doesn't talk about it very much because he's a little traumatized from that time in his life. But it was wild. It was very much 60s, 70s, hippie area, University of Texas. The clothing that people wore was totally changing. The hairstyles were totally changing. Yeah. And all around Austin is very conservative. So you had this very strange kind of battle between more progressive and more conservative. And my dad definitely found himself in the middle of that. And then he found the church, and did you say
he loved like Jimi Hendrix and rock music, like Woodstock?
He was
rock music,
full on hippie. I didn't find this out until I was older, and I was shocked because if you knew the dad I knew growing up, you would never imagine.
Almost like a different self.
Completely.
Yeah.
For that time. And for him, what I'm hearing from you is he kind of conceptualizes of that time, not like, exploration and try, but like the impact was negative. Like he's not thinking about it in a particularly positive way.
Absolutely. He doesn't think about it positively at all. I think he thinks of it as traumatic.
Okay.
That was very palpable for us growing up. He didn't talk about, I found out all of this stuff much later, but he didn't really talk about what he was like in college or what he did or didn't do.
He didn't want you to know that he had explored because he didn't want you exploring, I'm guessing.
That would be my assumption. Yes, that's kind of what I had deducted. But yes, he did not want us to know the kind of life that he had led. I think he was very ashamed of it.
Okay.
Definitely. Which is interesting because I look back at his pictures and just think he looks so cool. Like I just think of it as very cool, but he does not think of it that way. My mom was definitely much more innocent, even though, she joined the church at 14 and they had a heavy hand in her life from that time. And so even though she had parents who were alcoholics and very much not involved in their lives, she had other people guiding her and she didn't really experience the same things as my dad.
I was going to just say, what's interesting about your parents' story and the nest in which you're kind of born is what it feels like to be born into a situation where your parents feel saved by Mormonism. That's a really different thing than like, we were good, and then it added some things, or when it comes in and you feel like it saves you.
Absolutely. That you nailed it. It was very much like we found the way, the truth, the light. We know because we've experienced what, the world is. And now this is the truth. We have been saved by this.
Some of the most hardcore Orthodox Mormons and or religious people are ones that had scary developmental experiences and then feel like the church rescued them. And so it sounds like we're setting you up for a bit of a strict upbringing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I didn't mention this, but my dad's parents did struggle. They divorced and then got remarried. It was a very fraught relationship. So my dad also was coming out of a very difficult home. So he was searching for something for sure.
Okay. So how'd they meet?
So my dad served a mission. He hates when anyone tells this story. So my dad served a mission in London, England, and kind of unique because he ended up staying in the London area for like 75% of his mission. And normally they're all transferred around, and he was not. So he got to know my mom really well. He will tell you very strictly, they never had a romantic relationship while he was on his mission. That's very important to him. He was very much missionary, and she was Betty Henderson. Something about England is that there's not a lot of members out there. And so my mom, being a young girl in the church, took leadership roles very early on. She was the young women's president at 18. And so she interacted with the missionaries a lot in a leadership capacity. So even though they didn't develop feelings for each other on their mission, they knew each other very well.
Okay.
Okay. So when his mission is over, your outline says he swept her away to Midland, Texas.
He did, yes. And I don't know if this is a good time to bring this story in, but it's the story of why my mom married my dad. Like we say, what was it about Dad that made you say, yes, this is it? And she tells of this story when my dad was leaving his mission, his mother, my grandmother, who I very much adore. She had joined the church, and she came to take my dad home from his mission and like do the London sightseeing thing. So they were there together. My mom saw them in the car. He kind of like flagged her down, was like, hey, Sister Henderson. And she said she had a conversation with him, and she was leaving on her bike, and then just boom, she stopped. And we would say, oh, Mom, what was that feeling? She goes, it wasn't romance. It wasn't a flutter. It was just something. And she didn't know what that feeling was. And that's what made her decide that my dad was something special. And he married her and brought her to Midland, Texas.
How old was she?
She was 20 when they got married.
Okay.
Yes.
Pretty young.
Yeah. Not the youngest, but definitely pretty young. And she was leaving her whole world behind. I mean, leaving England at a time when you didn't have email, right? It was difficult even to call. So her and her sisters, who were very close, her siblings were very bonded because of their parents' situation. It was difficult for sure. And she went from this big city where she didn't know how to drive, because you don't need to know how to drive in London. And she moved out to Midland, Texas, where you absolutely need to know how to drive.
Was that the Permian Basin, like the oil country?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. My dad was a petroleum engineer, and so that's why they ended up in Midland. I don't think my mom appreciated like the visual change.
Yeah.
Just flat and brown, right?
Yes, flat
From
and brown.
lush and green.
But the number one thing that they always say is, it was hard, but the people are great out there. And it's true. They have lifelong friends that they made during that time. My mom felt very accepted by them and by the church, very loved. She's a very shy person by nature, and they really
trying
took
to
her
imagine this young woman with a British accent in
Texas,
in Midland, Texas in the 70s.
Yes, where everybody hugs and says hello, and they would point out her accent, and she was this very reserved, British, shy woman.
That must have been interesting for her.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
What an act of hope and faith, really. That change. That's a big change.
I think so too, and I felt they felt very bonded by the church, right? They were married. In England, you can't get married in the temple until you've been married civilly. So they were married civilly in the Hyde Park Chapel, which is kind of a staple chapel. If you've never been there, it's very cool. And then they were sealed in the London temple the next day.
Ooh.
My mom says, they didn't ever really date. They didn't have time to do it. Even though they knew each other for a long period of time, it was mostly apart. And I think she was just kind of taking a step of hope. I think she felt like it was the right thing in reference to the church, in reference to those feelings that she had had. And she was hoping it would work out for the best.
Yeah, I see.
Okay, so what was their early marriage and family life like?
They had their Midland years, which was before me. I'm the youngest of 5. And then they moved to Austin, Texas, thank goodness, because that's where I was born, and I love being from there. And so I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I have an oldest sister and 3 brothers. So my house was wild. That's how I remember it. My brothers were wild. I don't know how we all survived, truly. But it was an interesting household to grow up in because they're very different personalities. My dad was very, very, very strict. And even though, like y'all already said, he's a convert to the church, he did feel an obligation to be very orthodox. He wanted to follow it exactly as it should be followed. He really admired these multi-generational Mormon families that had roots here in Utah and had these children that grew up and continued the church tradition, and that's what he wanted for his future. So we had a very strict household. My mom was much more relaxed and just very there for us emotionally. We just always felt like my mom was cued in, and whereas my dad would kind of go to work and come home and be more of the disciplinarian.
So do you think of your Mormon upbringing as traditional? What was the Mormon vibe in your household? What were the rules, the standards?
Yeah.
How did your parents interact with each other and with the kids?
Yeah, I would say it was very traditional from my point of view. I mean, we went to church every Sunday, absolutely, like without question. We were going to go to church every Sunday. We had family home evening. That was very important to them. We had scripture study and we had prayer. We couldn't watch movies on the Sabbath. We couldn't hang out with friends on the Sabbath. We couldn't do sleepovers, things like that. Sometimes they would let us watch a movie, but it was, we had like a shelf that were okay movies, and they were a few Disney movies, and then the 10 Commandments by Charlton Heston. I could probably quote that whole movie because I loved movies growing up, so it was very difficult on Sundays to not be able to watch movies. I felt like Sundays were very boring, Yeah. So definitely very traditional. We were always thinking about the church and God and what we should be doing and what we should not be doing. It was talked about often.
And again, total children in the family?
5.
5. Mm-hmm. And you were, again?
The youngest.
I'm
the baby.
Okay, youngest of 5. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so your memories of being a Mormon kid?
I mean, it's funny because I just talked about how strict and uptight everything was, but I don't think my memories are honestly that bad. I had a really happy childhood. I was always a little scared of my dad because he was so strict. And he was the type of person that if you made a mistake, even if you didn't know if you made the mistake, like if you accidentally dropped something, you might get yelled at. And so we just kind of always stepped on eggshells around him. But my relationship with my mom was totally different. I just loved her. I mean, she's still my best friend, and I felt that from the time I was little. And she had her own struggles. My mom definitely has struggled with depression over the years, and there would be times when she kind of needed to withdraw a little bit. But my childhood was happy. I was very excited to be growing up in the church, and I felt very lucky because all that I knew was it was the correct path. It had saved my parents, and now because it saved them and they made the correct choices, I got to benefit from it, and I got to live in this religion that was the truth, right? That was definitely taught when I was young. It was the true church, no question. And I felt extremely lucky that I didn't have to do the hard work to find it. I was just born into it, born into the covenant, right?
You mentioned in your outline that your dad didn't baptize you, and that seems so weird to you considering that he was so strict. And I often think about sometimes the strictest religious people are battling demons or trying to fight off demons, and their strictness is really a reflection of how tormented sometimes they feel inside. What do you want to share or not share about kind of all of that?
Yeah, well, it was a pivotal time for me, my baptism, because I was a very good girl. I'm a people pleaser by nature. I want to take on leadership roles. I want to do the right thing. And I think growing up in the church, in a way, I thrived because I was like, oh, you told me the thing to do. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. I really romanticized my baptism because at the time, now they do it a little bit different, but at the time you had a personal baptism and everybody would come. All your friends would come and watch you get dunked into the water, and they would celebrate you, and you'd be wearing this beautiful dress. My mom had a white dress specially made for me. So I was very, very excited. And then shortly before, they informed me that my dad wouldn't be baptizing me and that a good friend would. And I was close with this good friend. didn't hate this idea. I didn't ask any questions because they told me that's how it was going to be. But I remember always being confused, and the baptism was private. Only our family was allowed to attend.
Oh, yeah.
And
in
I
Mormon
was
context,
devastated.
That means, for those who have no idea, usually it's the dad that baptizes the kid.
Yeah.
So if a dad isn't baptizing the kid, members are going to assume what?
Oh, yeah. They're going to assume that there's some sort of major sin or issue that he's working through.
And in the 70s or 80s, that would likely be assumed to be adultery, but it could also be in 2025 pornography or something like that, right?
Absolutely. And I still to this day do not know.
Yeah.
I have never asked because I know my mom feels so uncomfortable about it. And my dad, of course, would never talk about it. So, but at the time I was not cognizant of those things. But you're dead on. You wouldn't have a private baptism unless you were trying to, be more private and maybe hide something. You were embarrassed by something.
Yeah.
I remember just feeling so much sadness because I was so excited to get baptized. That's the first thing you're supposed to do. That's the first big marker you're supposed to do on your way to salvation, right? Was baptism. I was very jazzed for that. And my friends couldn't see it. I was just very upset about it. But baptism day was fine. I think they ask you all those awkward questions afterwards, like, don't you feel wonderful? Don't you feel clean?
Did you feel the gift of the Holy Ghost?
Things like that. And I'm sure I said yes, truthfully. I think I just felt happy, just not any different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you just for a little background with regard to your family culture as the youngest. So it sounds like you have 4 older siblings, and growing up in your family system, was it like, wow, there are many ways to live Mormonism. My siblings, make different choices, or there's room for personalities, or there's room. Or what did you observe? Or did you observe there's kind of one way to be? I better be effortful and kind of showing up a certain way. Does that make sense? The variability in how Mormonism was lived in your household. Was there variability?
That absolutely makes sense. And that's very helpful to bring up. It felt like there was one way to be. Absolutely. And it's interesting because my dad's a really strong personality, and all of us kids are really strong personalities. And a lot of my siblings, were a little bit troublesome growing up, but it was made very clear to me as the youngest that was not the correct way to be. And it was made very clear to them that's not the correct way to be. You need to be the perfect Mormon, basically. Like, you have this path that you need to walk, is very specific. You get baptized, you start going to the temple at 12. Then eventually you're endowed and you get married in the temple and you live a righteous life. That's the way. And that was what it was expected. So there was no room for different beliefs, ideals, or personalities.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned in your outline that the Mormon teaching around eternal families was really central to your family's devotion to the church. And that comes into play later as marriages struggle in your family context. Do you want to talk about that teaching and its impact on your family at all?
Yes. Well, there's really 2 big pivotal stories. The first one is my grandmother. My grandmother is very special to me. She's the only grandparent I knew. And I always knew her as like a very old lady. I'm actually mesmerized by people who have young grandmothers because my grandmother was 78 when I was born.
Oh.
So by the time I knew her, she was in her 80s really. And I knew that she was a convert to the church. And I didn't really know why, but a big reason for her was her son, Fletcher. So my grandmother had 3 boys. My dad's the youngest, and he had a brother named Fletcher. And when Fletcher was 15, unfortunately, he passed away from a motorcycle accident. And it was really, really tragic. I mean, it was something talked about in our family growing up often. And my grandmother very much struggled with Fletcher's death. I mean, never could get over it. I think my dad, as a younger sibling, felt a little bit abandoned by her emotionally because she just had to withdraw. And so when she converted to the church, this whole idea of families can be together forever was essential for her. I mean, maybe even life-saving, because she felt like she could be with her son again. The thing that I find interesting about that is that she actually had a very difficult time becoming endowed because she was a single woman for a long time because my grandpa had passed, and the church kind of gave her a difficult time with getting endowed. They had a lot of rules about who could be endowed, why, and when. And she got turned away from the temple when she went for her endowment once because of just being a single woman. And it was important for her to be endowed and to be sealed to my grandfather so that she could be sealed to her children.
Yes.
So that would have been your dad's brother who passed away?
Yes.
So for your dad too, staying faithful was a way to see his brother who had passed away.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, he doesn't talk about it a lot, but definitely. And then the other side of it was, I told you of that moment that my mom had when she met my dad, or when he was leaving, and she said she had this aha moment, but she didn't know what it meant. Well, my mom came to Texas, of course, and while she was in Texas, she got really excited about genealogy, as many Mormons do. And she just started feverishly searching her own genealogy. And we have this family Bible. And in this family Bible, one of our ancestors from the late 1800s, they had a baby. And the baby was marked as being born in Texas. And my mom was like, what is this? You know, she called her sisters. Her sisters are like, I don't understand, because the public records for this baby say that this baby is born in England. So my mom started researching, which was so hard back then. This was in the 80s, so we did not have the internet.
It was microfiche.
Exactly.
Right?
And she would go to cemeteries. That's what my mom and her sisters would do. They would go to cemeteries and they would take grave rubbings. I have a joke with my English cousins. Anytime I'd go visit England, we would always be walking around cemeteries. Like, that's my memory of England. And English cemeteries are gorgeous, so I find them very peaceful, but they would do grave rubbings, her and her sisters, and they would find the public records that were kept there at the church and at the cemetery. So she really dug into this family, and then she found out that this man, William Cope, did bring his family. William and Christina brought their family to Texas in the late 1800s when Texas was still frontier. And they came to Texas with all of their children, and they were here for a good while. There were babies that were born here. And then William got very sick, and Christina decided, well, we better go back to England because they don't have medical care here in Texas. So they go back to England. William dies. And then the whole rest of her life, Christina stays in England and she raises her children, and she says over and over, I never should have left Texas. It was great there. And one of her kids decided to be the adventurer, and he came back to Texas, and he ended up having a whole line of children here in Texas that nobody knew anything about until my mom was here, boots on the ground, and she discovered it.
Literal boots on the ground.
Literal boots on the ground, yeah. Although, let's be honest, she wasn't wearing boots because she's still very British. But she hunted down this family, the Runnels, and she found this woman named Lillian Runnels, who lives in this, it's still a tiny know-nothing town in Texas. And Lillian had this treasure trove of genealogy. It's really amazing. She had letters from these family members back to their family in England, and just all of these records. So my mom was able to discover all of these people, all these individuals, and do their temple work.
Oh.
And it was at that moment.
Meaning she would be baptized for those who had deceased in the temple.
Yes. So the importance of doing genealogy when you're Mormon is to be able to do their temple work, because you believe it's your responsibility to do those ordinances for them. Because obviously in Mormonism, you can't get to the highest level of the celestial kingdom without those ordinances being done. So it's a great act of service, and you feel this burden, this expectation to do genealogy. My mom felt that. And after she got these records, actually, the records that Lillian had were burned in a fire on accident. So my mom has the only surviving pictures, letters, records from those people. And she will say it was in that moment that everything came full circle. So if we're remembering back to when she had that aha moment with my dad, that's when she said, this is it. The reason I married your dad, that feeling that I had, was what we call the spirit of Elijah. This was such an important theme in my family growing up. It was the spirit of Elijah telling me to marry your dad so that I could connect these ancestors and do their ordinances for them.
Yeah, and Joseph Smith was all about making sure that everyone could get back to heaven as a united family.
Yes.
And that's where the proxy work for the dead teachings come from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump to your aspiring theater kid actress self and Once Upon a Mattress.
Okay, so growing up, I loved performance so much. But I was a very good girl. Like, I followed everything in Mormonism to the T.
Good girl.
We Mormons, I was a good boy. You know,
I know.
we're all about
that. Because I do think, and you've done a bit of that, right? It's very people pleasing, because ultimately children are children,
Yes.
right? This good and bad thing.
Margie hates good girl.
But in Mormonism, that means people pleasing. What else would you say? When you say good girl, defining yourself, what do you mean?
People pleasing, submissive, definitely. Obedient. You followed the church to a T. Yeah. So I remember at the age of 8, I started trying to read my scriptures every day. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Especially since I had been baptized, I didn't want to make mistakes after that. It was very important for me not to make mistakes. And so as I started getting older, this became very difficult because I was passionate about the church, but I was really, really passionate about theater. Like, it was my heart and soul. I wanted to be a famous actress when I grew up, and performance was everything. It's what got me through, I feel like, my adolescent years. And when I was 12, I auditioned for a play called Once Upon a Mattress. It's a really fun little play. And I got the lead, which was crazy.
Was it Princess and the Pea?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Carol Burnett was in the original stage performance. It's so funny. And I got the main part of Larkin. The problem was, and I was really excited. My mom was excited too, because a lot of other kids had tried out. Most of them were older than me, and I got it. So I was very excited. But then we find out that the main character became pregnant out of wedlock. Her story is that she's pregnant out of wedlock and can't get married until the prince gets married. And then it's all about finding the prince or princess, which is where the Princess and the Pea comes in. And so it's essential to the story that she be pregnant out of wedlock. It moves the story along. That's how I thought of it as a young girl. I thought of it as funny. You know, it makes sense for the story. I definitely wanted to take the role. My mom was very bothered by it. Understandably so. You know, I don't blame her for being bothered by it. Her and I have talked a lot about it since. She brought it to me and basically said, you know, Jennie, do you feel like you should be doing this role? And I knew what she wanted me to say. You know, she wanted me to say, no, I don't feel like I should be doing this role. But I said, yes, of course I want to do this role. You know, absolutely. I'd be crazy to turn it down. And she kept on talking me through it. And then she kind of hit me with the hard hitter, which is, you know, if Jesus was in the room watching you do this play, would you be comfortable performing it? And I just knew, you know, I have to say no. The truth is, I don't think I cared one way or the other. I don't think I thought too much about it. But I said, you know, no, I don't think I'd be comfortable doing that. And I did turn down the role.
You did. How old were you?
I was 12.
So you were 12.
And a Mormon parent is going to process that like, look, she used her free agency and she totally chose the right.
So it reminds me of parents also saying, have you prayed about it? And it makes like a parent feel like there's this choice involved, where in actuality what the child is hearing is like, oh, it's a no.
Exactly. Exactly. Or a lot of parents do this with baptism. They say, I'm so proud of my child for choosing to be baptized. You know, as if an 8-year-old can make a really responsible decision. And of course they're going to choose because that's what's expected of them. What that moment, the reason I brought it up in my outline, it was very important because it taught me a few things. It taught me that I got rewarded for doing what other people wanted me to do. It reinforced that. And it also taught me that what I wanted was not important. What I wanted was what we call, here we go, 2 Nephi, the natural man. You know, and the natural man is an enemy to God. So what I wanted was against what God wanted. God wanted me to do what he wanted. He did not want me to do what I wanted. And I didn't even think of that as a bad thing at the time. I just thought that my natural desires were evil and I needed to spend the rest of my life eradicating that evilness.
That is so big. That is so big because what that actually means is, and I've talked about this a little bit before, but to a child or to a young girl, it's basically don't trust yourself. It's basically like what you feel. And that's a very existential crisis, by the way, that what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you desire right? What you yearn for, all of that is not to be trusted. Your experience is just not to be trusted.
Yes.
It's so powerful.
I agree with you. And that's kind of what I've just dissected in adulthood. Of course, at the time, I was not cognizant of that. I got in this very strange habit of when I prayed, I would like hide from God what I actually wanted. I would not ask, because, you're supposed to pray and express your gratitude and things like that. But then you're supposed to talk about things that you desire. And I would only talk about wanting churchy things. Like I want to be more righteous, or I want to find a righteous husband, or I want to make it to the temple. I wouldn't ask God for what I really wanted, because I felt as soon as I voiced it would be the moment I would not get it. And I wanted it really bad. And so I just kept it very much inside, very deep, deep, deep inside.
And my heart broke for 12-year-old Jennie reading your outline, because you wrote, I learned that what I wanted was wrong, that I couldn't trust my own thoughts and desires, and that I needed to learn to sacrifice for God.
Absolutely. And if I had one theme for my spiritual development in adolescence, it would be that all those things were reinforced. And I don't think I'm alone in that. It's unique to me, of course, but I know so many other people who have also experienced that. So when I think about it with my parents, like it would be easy for me to say, and people have said this to me since I've left the church. They've said, well, maybe it was your parents. And I fight back with that. And I'm like, I think my parents were trying to do what they thought they should be doing. It was everything that they were being taught that they should do for their kids.
Mm. And I think that's why Mormonism is so multi-layered, is because it's not just Sundays at church. It's not just like when you're in the building.
Yeah.
It's that the family system supports and shows up in much the same way, when they're all in, and when they're, the structure is actually created to reinforce the church system when you're not at church. Does that make sense? So you are living and breathing it oftentimes 24/7.
Absolutely. There's no breaks. It is your life. It's all consuming, for sure.
Right.
As I think about the way high demand religions work, and also how your parents were probably processing all of this, I'm sure that in their mind, their goal was to prevent their children from, drinking, taking drugs, or having sex. Like that was probably the whole banana for them.
Yeah.
And in a sense, there can be good things that come out of that, because it can help keep a kid safe.
Yeah.
But the cost or the price can be a kid just learning to tune out what's inside and what they care about and what they want. So talk about your Mormon adolescence in that context, if you want.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. Well, and it's interesting because all my siblings are a little bit different, and some of them really kind of went crazy. And me being the youngest, viewing some of the choices they made, seeing how disappointed my parents were in those choices, I was not going to make those same mistakes. Like, absolutely not. And it was so important to my parents, as you said. It was palpable for my dad growing up that we not make those mistakes. I think one of the things I talked about, and I think it's important to talk about, is my dad was really strict with media content, and he would not let me watch Disney Channel original movies because they were like too teenage themed. Like there were always like 13-year-olds dating 13-year-olds and things like that. And he did not want us thinking that was okay. So those were not allowed in our house. But at the same time, he let us watch Braveheart. It was a very weird standard. So as a girl, especially, kind of how he treated my brothers was a little bit different. But as a girl, I felt this extreme pressure to stay pure and to not indulge in any sort of, intuition or any sort of thoughts that would have been developing at that time. One of the things also about me growing up was they were very strict about dating. So a lot of Mormons are not actually as strict about dating. Like at 14, you can start going to dances, but at 14, I could only go to church dances. My parents wouldn't let me go to school dances. I could never go to school dance until I went to prom, and I had to really beg to go to prom, and I had to go with a large group of people. And then most Mormons also start dating at 16. My parents said that what the church meant by dating was going out in groups of mixed gendered. So I actually wasn't allowed to date at all until I left for college. And it just instilled in me this pressure that my parents were very anxious about me being pure so that I could find a righteous priesthood holder and marry that man when I got older.
Okay.
You write in your outline, finish the sentences, immodesty was like unto what?
Pornography.
And losing your virginity was like unto?
Murder.
Yeah, and you're not exaggerating.
No. And I felt, that's exactly how I felt about it as a young girl. That was not just enforced by my parents. I've been talking about them a lot, but absolutely enforced by the church. I remember all of the young women's lessons, the licked cupcake. I got that lesson.
That if you experimented sexually, then what?
Yeah, that nobody would want you.
Because you would be like a licked cupcake.
Yeah, you'd be dirty.
Yeah.
Sinful, bad, unrighteous.
Yeah. And they don't oftentimes just tell that story like a licked cupcake. They'll bring in a cupcake
and lick
they will lick it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's an object. We call that an object lesson.
An object lesson. Yes, absolutely. And that chastity.
There's also chewed gum. Who wants to eat gum that's already been chewed? And that's a woman's virtue. Strangely, the boys don't have that lesson.
No, they really don't. And it's very frustrating. And then the modesty thing, for the girls all the time, and there was no mincing of words when I was younger. I've thought back to this a lot and talked to a lot of people in my youth group and been like, these lessons were taught to us, right? And the lessons were, don't dress immodestly because you will be a temptation for these boys. You are doing them a disservice. You're walking pornography. And so your body is a weapon. If they see it, they just won't be able to control themselves. And really, that's on you for dressing immodestly. You should have known better. So help these boys out and dress modestly.
Which probably has implications for sexuality later, right? If you feel like your body's dangerous and needs to be covered and protected and, held with terror, basically, for the implications of what might happen.
Yes, absolutely. And I definitely saw that play into a lot of insecurities that I had. I just never had a chance to find a way to be comfortable in my own body. I developed a lot of insecurities in my adolescent years. Young Jennie was very outgoing. She could take on the world, very courageous. And then teenage Jennie became very withdrawn, very self-conscious. I just was always worried about how I looked, how I was presenting myself, and I was thinking about it 24/7. I was very also worried about my righteousness and my spirituality. I read my scriptures a lot, daily. And if I skipped a day, then I would double up the next day. Sometimes I would skip a week because I was on vacation, and then I would double up throughout that next week. And I really felt it in my mind, like if I don't do this, something bad is going to happen to me. Like I am not fulfilling what I need to be fulfilling.
I have a question just around your inner self, what you remember about your inner self at that time. So do you feel like what you did on the inside, like did you feel sometimes attraction to people still? And was that something that you hid? Like you still experienced it, but you hid it? Or was it more like you dissociated, like you actually cut off and didn't even have that experience because it was so, how would you describe on the inside how you experienced, attraction, developmentally appropriate feelings toward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember when I started having those feelings and I quashed them pretty quickly. But then when I was 17, I fell in love with my first boyfriend, like my first real love. And it's the first time I did really feel that. And I knew immediately, like, this is bad news. And I knew I could never tell my parents, and I never did. And I hid the fact that I was dating him. And, I was so in love with him, like as only a 17-year-old girl can be. He really was everything. And I definitely felt attracted to him. And we, did some things. We never had sex, but we definitely crossed the Mormon line. It was more than kissing. And I felt so much guilt every time we did that. Even though I wanted to do it, I remember we would like make out, and then I would come home and read my scriptures. And then I would usually message him trying to convert him to the church. This poor boy. He was not a member of the church. That's also very important because that was a big, big no-no. I knew that I had to marry a member of the church, and I had to date a member of the church as well. I had siblings who had dated people who are not Mormon, and those people were basically not even welcomed into our home, unfortunately. And I did not want my parents to know about him at all. So I hid it until my dad found out about it. And then everything blew up. He got very, very mad. He totally chewed out this guy. And of course, this boy broke up with me and just shattered my heart. And for me, it was a confirmation, like what you were saying, you know, I had hid those feelings from my parents. I still wanted to feel those feelings. I was still cognizant of it, but I was hiding it. And then that encouraged me to retreat those feelings further, because I felt like how everything exploded with my dad and then this boy breaking up with me and breaking my heart was all my fault. It was my fault because I had indulged in this natural man again.
You had dared to want something for yourself.
Yeah. And like I said before, I showed God that I wanted it, right? And it was definitely taken away from me in a big way. I got very sad. I remember my mom was really great in this time because she knew I was really depressed, and she recognized that I had really gone into a full-on depression. And she took me to a doctor, and we got to talk things through a little bit. I started exercising and doing some more like healthy things to kind of help pop myself out of this. But I got very, very depressed, and I visited with my bishop, of course. I wanted to see my bishop, and my parents wanted me to see my bishop. And I visited my bishop because this is what you do. If you make a mistake in Mormonism, you don't just repent silently. I mean, if you make a big mistake, you have to go to your bishop. That's how it was taught to me. Like, there are some sins that you just can't undo yourself. So I went to my bishop. Thankfully, I had a really, I think, a positive experience with him. He was a very kind man. He didn't ask me any inappropriate questions, which happened to some of my friends. He just helped me sort through this sin that I had made with my ex-boyfriend, and he put me kind of on the path to righteousness. He did take away that I had to not take the sacrament for a whole month. And that was devastating.
Yeah.
Because it's socially embarrassing. But more than that, because my natural desire was to do the right thing, not being able to take the sacrament was really devastating just for me personally. He gave me a whole scripture outline to read from the Book of Mormon, and I did. I read it, I studied it, I met back with him, and then after a month I was able to take the sacrament again. And, you know, I promised myself I'd never do it again.
From the church's perspective, you know, they would say to members that this is the worst, close to the worst thing that could ever happen to you. From the church's self-interest perspective, this is the best thing that could ever happen to a member, I believe, because it basically teaches you to stay on the straight and narrow and to obey your leaders and to do what the church says, because the repercussions are so severe. So in some sense, you become theirs at this point.
Absolutely.
And the flip to that is you're no longer yours. And that's where our viewers and listeners will have to forgive. We're going to be bringing up the severance metaphor probably quite a bit over the next few weeks and months. But have you seen Severance?
I love Severance. This is great. You're innie and you're outie.
So this is where your outie Jennie says, I need an innie Jennie because the outie Jennie isn't behaving correctly.
Yes.
And this is where your inner Jennie just really develops at this point in your...
Absolutely.
You know, you kind of started, innie Jennie started developing during the Princess and the Pea. But really, when you go through this repentance process and you've now almost committed the sin next to murder, that's when innie Jennie starts thriving, right?
For sure. And I recommitted myself. So the whole goal, when you're a woman in the church, at least when I was growing up, the whole goal is to be married in the temple to a righteous priesthood holder. That is it.
That's the whole point of Young Women's, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, of course, there's other things tied into it. They want to teach you to be a good person and other things. They want to teach you how to serve and to be a leader and that. But they really drive home the whole righteous priesthood leader. I knew I was I was not, I knew that that's the path that I wanted. And this really solidified that for me. Like, even when I was dating this boy, I remember thinking I could never marry him. Like, he would have to become a member of the church, or I'm going to eventually have to find somebody else. And then, like you said, going through that repentance process kind of like drove it home. No, I'm recommitted to the path.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your outline, you learned that you need a Mormon man to tell you the pathway.
Absolutely.
Not your own inner voice, because your inner voice gets you into trouble and has unrighteous desires. Is that right?
Yes, that was solidified a few times. There was this incident, it's not a bad incident, but when I was 14, I knew I could get my patriarchal blessing if I wanted, but I was very, very stressed out. I wanted to know that God wanted me to get the blessing. That was important for me. I needed to know if it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to just be trendy. And I prayed for it, I kid you not, for a year. 1 year, every night, God, do you want me to get my patriarchal blessing? And nothing. I mean, silence, crickets, right? So I just kept praying. And then this one day, my dad wanted to give me a father's blessing, which I hated getting father's blessings. But for some reason, I said, yes, okay, that's fine. And he gave me a blessing. And in the blessing, he said, Jennie, the Lord wants you to get your patriarchal blessing. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, that's my answer. And it's like what you were saying. It kind of laid this pathway of, I don't get the answers. Other people get the answers for me. Priesthood men get the answers for me. My dad, who I didn't have necessarily a close relationship with, he got the answer for me because he was holding the priesthood.
I get it. I wonder if we should explain what a patriarchal blessing is just really quickly.
Yeah, so a patriarchal blessing is something that you can get when you're 14, but you have to get it by a patriarch, which is a special calling. It's really prestigious calling in the church. It's a special calling given to a man. Of course, only a man can have it because you have to hold the priesthood. And they give you this very special blessing. In it, they tell you which house you are in of the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. And
your spiritual lineage.
Yes, your spiritual lineage. Thank you. Yeah. But they also, it's almost like, this is a terrible way to put it. Mormons would be so offended, but it's like fortune telling almost. They're telling you a little bit about your future, like what you're going to see and expect in your future, what it is about you that's special, what you're going to achieve. So
and
it's a big deal.
It's supposed to be Heavenly Father's words. And that's why it's such a sacred calling, because you're allegedly channeling not some mystic force. It's God's words for you, right?
It's God's words for you. And also the patriarchal blessing is supposed to it's very sacred. It's supposed to be kept secret. My parents were in attendance with mine, but you're not supposed to read it to anybody. You're not supposed to share it with anybody. You get an official copy from the church. I had mine laminated and I kept it in my scriptures and I reread it often. And that was also encouraged. The church encourages that all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times when you're struggling spiritually, they'll say, well, have you read your patriarchal blessing lately? Because basically all patriarchal blessings are going to confirm what the church wants you to do, the path that the church wants you to do. Mine definitely confirmed that. You know, it did tell me things specific to myself, I felt at the time, but it also confirmed that I was going to find a righteous priesthood holder and marry in the temple, and I was going to be a mother. And then, yes, it told me my spiritual lineage and kind of what I should do with that and things like that.
And I joke, but Mormon patriarchal blessings literally never say, you're going to become a successful career businesswoman, never get married and never have kids and leave the church and thrive as a self-actuated feminist. You know?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely not. And if they would have at that time, I would have been horrified. I've been like, what are they talking about? You know, I remember what's funny is I remember getting my official patriarchal blessing back from the church, and they spelled my name Jenny. I spell my name Jennie because my real name is Janice. So we've always spelled Jennie, Jennie. And I was really bothered. I was very bothered as a 14, 15-year-old girl at this time because what you said, I truly felt these were God's words. Yeah. I felt like he saw me. He was talking exactly to me. He knew my life exactly. God would definitely know that I spelled my name with an IE, and there it was on paper with a Y, and it did bother me for a long time.
Which in the end is just way too much power, right?
Yes.
For anyone to have. Because oftentimes they'll promise that you'll get married, but you don't, or they promise you'll serve a mission, but you won't, or that you'll become an apostle, but you don't. And then these Mormons are left just hearts broken. Was it me? Did I do something wrong?
Yeah.
Why did my partner die without us having kids? Or why did my kids die and I never had kids, but my patriarchal blessing said I would raise my kids?
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's disasters waiting to happen for many, not for all, but for many.
For sure. And there's this line at the end of mine, I don't know if other people have it, where it says something like, but this is almost a direct quote, like, all these things are contingent upon your righteousness. Mm-hmm. So in the end, it's your fault.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
If it doesn't work out, it is your fault.
So and we call that blame reversal in kind of high demand religion or cult.
Yeah.
Awareness. House always wins. If the good things happen, then the church gets all the credit. Mm-hmm. If bad things happen, you did it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And speaking of doing it wrong, let's talk about your decision to get married and how that went.
Yes.
Sorry, no offense meant by that, but
no,
it's only because I've read your outline.
Yes. No, it's true. So it's interesting talking about my marriage, and I'm gonna step through this as gracefully as I can, because I married a man named David, and he's an amazing person. He's an amazing human. And this whole time that I'm going to talk about this marriage story, I don't want to diminish that. I grew up with David. We've known each other since we were 5, and he is a wonderful person. Like I said, we became best friends in high school, and he was my best friend. And I mean, he was my friend, capital Friend, right? I didn't have those feelings for him. When I got into college, even though I was going to school, I went to BYU Idaho. Yeah. And BYU Idaho is very strict. And honestly, I had a great time. At that time, I had a great time. I definitely was there for school, but dating was in the forefront, as it is for everybody. And it's drilled into you. That's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be dating and looking for marriage. And so I was kind of experimenting and dating with all these guys. And David also went to BYU Idaho, and we were still best friends. And then he left on his mission to Brazil, and we continued to write letters. And the whole time I remember thinking, just feeling friendship for him. I actually had a couple of relationships while he was gone. One which was very serious, and then all of those ended and kind of blew up in my face. So I felt very lost as to what I was supposed to feel in order to get married. Like, what am I supposed to feel for the person to know that I should marry them? And the number one thing that kept coming back to me is like, God will make it clear to you. So in my mind, the most important thing on deciding who to marry was not how I felt about the person sexually. It wasn't about how I felt about them romantically. It was about, does God want me? Has he given me the sign to marry this person? That was number one.
Like he gave your mom.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
right. Parallel.
Very much so. And also, is this person a righteous priesthood holder? So David came back from his mission kind of at the perfect time where I was just really searching, and we started hanging out again and we started dating. And I remember at that time not having those feelings for him.
That you'd had for that boyfriend in high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I knew it, but I thought that was a good thing. I thought that was the sign from God. And I know this sounds crazy to people who are not in it, but it made perfect sense to me at the time. I thought really it was God's sign, because God was basically like, you'll be able to make it to the temple with this person. Because with all my other boyfriends, I was always nervous. We would mess up so badly, like we would have sex. And so we didn't have sex, but if we would have, that we would not be able to make it to the temple. And so anytime I started having very strong feelings for a boy I was dating, we broke up.
It's almost like, I can stay pure with this person.
Exactly.
Because I'm actually, not attracted.
Yes. And that was definitely it. And David felt the opposite. We've talked about this a lot in recent years, because I'm like, would you ever have married me if you hadn't have felt those feelings? He's like, no. And I'm like, that's the privilege, of a man, in the church. Whereas I didn't feel afforded that same privilege. What was important to me was that he was a righteous priesthood holder. He was also a very safe space for me. Like, he is a wonderful person. He was a wonderful friend. I felt extremely safe with him. I felt like I could talk to him about anything, but those feelings were not there. And we only dated for 6 weeks. before he proposed. I even remember a week before he proposed, I said, I think we should break up and date other people. I think that would be a good idea. I do not want to get married. And then a week later he proposed. I remember the proposal like it was yesterday because I remember in my head, I was screaming no. And I just said, yes. And I still to this day don't understand it.
Well, that's innie versus outie Jennie, right? Outie Jennie was screaming no at innie Jennie, but innie Jennie is following the plan. Right?
I was following the plan and I said yes. And we only had a 6-week engagement before we got married because we wanted to fit it in. We wanted to fit it in before we went back to school. So many people do this. It's so sad.
And he'd been home how long from his mission?
Oh, 3 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
And about David, I remember him talking, and this happens to a lot of guys when they're on their mission. They really revere their mission presidents for the most part. Like if you've had a pretty good experience on your mission, you really love your mission president and you take their advice very strongly because they're the authoritative priesthood holder.
Yeah.
It's like they're speaking for God. And, the mission president said, go home and get married. And David took that very seriously. And he felt like that was his path and his plan. He was going to go home. He was going to get an education, get married.
So he did.
Yeah. We got married 3 months. And then in every day of our engagement, my poor mother and poor David, because I cried every single day of our engagement. And I think both of them had no idea what was going on. And they were both desperate to try to help me. My mom sat me down about 2 weeks before the wedding. It was right before I got endowed. And she said, you don't have to do this. And I was like, Mom, all the invitations have been set. The temple date is set. I have to do this. This is what God wants me to do.
You would learn to snuff out your inner voice, that your inner voice was wicked.
Yes.
And you sacrifice for God. You sacrifice.
You put yourself on the altar.
I did. And now it's interesting. I've said this to David a few times recently, and I said, I got married to you, and in many ways I was very lucky to do that at that time because I was going to get married to somebody at that time. Yep. That was the goal. It was going to happen. And if it had to happen at that time, I just think honestly at a young age, I thought I was old at the time because I was 21. So many of my friends had gotten married at 19 or 20. I was 21. But that was so young. I don't think it was just a good time for me in general to get married. But if I had to get married to anyone at that age, I'm glad it was a safe space like David.
That's right. Strong friendship.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad he's a good guy because the important part of this story to me is you learning through the church to silence your inner voice.
Yeah.
And the fact that you became your own self-sacrifice. And if he had been a bad husband,
right,
that would all get muddled and confused in the story. But the truth is he was a good guy.
Yes, absolutely. And he was my biggest cheerleader. And, he grew up in the church as well and had his own innie outie, like you were talking about, and dissecting those own things as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's it like being married to a man you aren't really super into?
Our marriage was very hard.
There's this thing in Mormonism that I think Spencer W. Kimball said that any two Mormons can make a marriage work if they're both righteous, right?
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because I cannot tell you how many BYU Idaho devotionals I went to, which BYU Idaho devotionals are a big deal. And, you're more righteous if you go. And of course I went to them every Tuesday. And they talked about marriage a lot and they would say that often. They would say the most important thing to a successful marriage is marrying in the temple to two righteous people, a righteous priesthood holder and a righteous woman. Yeah. And I definitely took that to heart. I thought anything can be successful. So it's up to us to make it happen. We made the dream come true. We were both made it to the temple. We got married in the San Antonio temple on August 29th, the worst date ever. If you are from Texas, August 29th is a terrible day to get married. It is so hot. Yeah. It was 109 degrees that day. So we were pouring sweat taking our pictures. And I don't look back on that. Our wedding anniversary is a day I always really struggle with because when I look back to my wedding day, it just doesn't feel like anything was me. It doesn't have me in it. It's not the date I wanted. It's not the place I wanted.
Yeah. Was the endowment positive for you?
Oh, no. Oh, this is so good. No, I was traumatized by the endowment, and I was really ashamed how traumatized I was by the endowment because I knew I was supposed to feel spiritual about it. The reason is because I didn't know about all of the symbolic clothing. Right before I got endowed.
For those who don't know, this is the temple ceremony that you go through as an adult in the Mormon temple. Sorry, keep going.
No, it's so important to explain. And I know I have lots of friends listening who have never been Mormon and don't know. So the temple is not something you can just walk in. You have to have a special recommend to get in. And you have to be able to answer all the right questions to get that recommend, which means I needed to be pure. For instance, I could not have had sex, and I needed to be cleared by my bishop to be able to...
No coffee, no tea, no alcohol.
Paying your tithing. Of course, you have to be a full tithe payer. And so I had that special card and was able to go do what they call the endowment, which is a very strange ceremony that is difficult to describe, honestly. But in that ceremony, you wear symbolic clothing. So before this endowment, all I knew about the temple was that you wear a basic white temple dress. I had seen many women wear this dress. It's actually they're very pretty, most of them. I really liked my temple dress. I always felt very pretty in it. What I was not aware of was that in the endowment ceremony, you also place a lot of other symbolic clothing on you. And it's very awkward.
A green apron, a veil.
Yes.
Robes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the boys wear the weirdest hat called a meter, and the girls wear these veils that I wish they were pretty, but they're not pretty, and they never stay on right, and your hair never looks good. And my mom had showed me this clothing.
It's definitely the most culty part of Mormonism is the Mormon temple ceremony.
For sure. Yeah. And when I explain this ceremony to people who have never been Mormon, they go, and you didn't think you were in a cult. And I'm like, you have to understand that when you are in it, I mean, you would have no idea that this was weird. Like, you feel that it's strange, but you also know in your heart that's what you should be doing.
And all your loved ones are surrounding you, smiling like it's their proudest moment.
Yeah, it is their proudest moment. Absolutely. My mom, thankfully, the night before I was endowed, she showed me, she said, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to show you what you're going to do. Because she knows me and she knows I was freaking out. And she showed me all the clothing and I was just like, whoa. So we go through this endowment and I'm wearing all of this symbolic clothing. I felt so uncomfortable the whole time. I hated the fact that David was there seeing me look like that. I didn't feel pretty. I didn't feel cute. You want to feel cute around your fiance. His parents were there. I hated that they were there seeing me looking awkward and not feeling comfortable. And then, of course, after the endowment, I learned that I was going to have to wear all that really ugly symbolic clothing on my wedding day. And that was really devastating.
Now, some would say that's superficial. Why does it matter what you look like? But then again, we have the whole bridal industry. Like, what bride doesn't want to look the way they want to look on their wedding? So, I mean,
yeah.
I hear that.
No, for sure. And I remember growing up, and when I was preparing for my wedding, actually that conversation was brought up. You know, it was important to my parents that we not be superficial for my wedding. It wasn't about the glam. It was about the sacredness of the ceremony. But my personality is very different. Like, I'm a very girly girl, and I've always loved dressing up. Like, I loved performance, right? Anytime I got to perform a role and be something very fancy, I was always very excited. So, of course, I had romanticized how I was going to look on my wedding. And when I learned that I was not only not going to look how I wanted to look on my wedding, in fact, I was going to look exactly the opposite. Like, I was going to feel ugly on my wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, too, sometimes the things that come up, the way we talk about it can seem like, if we're going to judge them, though I don't think we should, as being more appearance. But honestly, there are deep-rooted things like consent, the fact that you don't actually know that you're going to wear all that stuff.
Yes.
And then by the time you are aware, you can't really back out. Like, structurally, there are a lot of controls in place to make that very uncomfortable to do. I think also there's this aspect, too. You're looking in mirrors at one point, and I think also there's this piece of, like, who doesn't envision moments that matter and the way, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to look like. And when you're not prepared, I remember having the same feeling, looking in the mirror of like, how is that me? This is a person I actually do not recognize right now. And that's a very scary, disorienting feeling on a day that feels so impactful.
Yes. Yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it exactly. You don't feel like you. I did. I felt ugly. And it's important to understand that as far as my heart goes, in reference to the church, I was in it. Like I was a full believer. So I felt like I was there for the right reasons in my heart. I'm like, I am here to do the sacred covenant that's going to get me to heaven. And of course I was excited about that, but I was not excited about everything else. Yeah. It was very sad.
It's like in that infinite mirror that you look at in the ceiling room, your outie sees your innie and says, who is that?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't recognize that person.
I'm loving this analogy. We got to keep it going, John.
It's working on
and
so
it's
many
actually
levels.
perfect for this story and a great way to describe it. So, but that is exactly correct. And being so young and not able to discern that whole idea of this isn't me, having no assertiveness, no inner voice, no courage to be able to kind of like look beyond and say, what is me? That just wasn't developed at that time.
Yeah.
So then you're married, and I was just so shocked in the first paragraph of you describing your marriage, you wrote, I hated sex. And I'm just trying to think,
I did.
What would marriage be like if one of the two people hated sex?
Yeah, so I had grown up being very scared of sex, not like I wanted to do it. That's not what I meant. But I knew it was bad. And so I suppressed all of those feelings. My assumption in my mind was that sex was going to be so powerful, like it was going to be so amazing that once somebody had it, they just like wouldn't be able to stop, and they'd literally be fine having it with like anybody. That's kind of what like the fear that was built up in my mind is like, oh, you can't even risk going too far with anyone because then you'll go crazy.
You can't control yourself. It's like an on-off switch where if you turn it on, it's just...
It's on.
It's like the Balrog has been released.
Interesting.
Yes. And so people would say, well, didn't you realize you didn't have chemistry with David before? And I said, yes, I did realize, but I thought that sex was like this magic key, that was going to be amazing. And it was going to unlock all the things. Well, that didn't happen. And it was a huge struggle. Actually, we weren't even able to be successfully intimate for 2 weeks because I was so closed up and it couldn't happen. And kudos to David, because you can imagine how he must have been freaking out in his mind. And he didn't push me and he was not mean. So he was very gentle with me through that whole thing. And I just kept on expecting it to get better and better, and it didn't. And so then what ended up happening, and I actually listened to an episode by Dr. Finlayson Fife recently, and she talked about this. She talked about the problems of duty sex, which is when you just have it because you think you have to. You feel like you have to do this for your partner, right? And so even though you're consenting, you're not consenting. So I would say for probably the first 8 years of our marriage, that was what our entire sexual life was like. And it was terrible for both of us. David hated it and I hated it. I thought I was just a very broken person who just hated sex, I guess. I told him that many times. I would say, the problem's me. It's not you. I guess I just don't like this. I think it would be like this with anybody. That's what I would say. And for years and years, we just kind of kept on going on. But that built so much resentment. I started feeling really terrible thoughts about David because it did start feeling like unconsensual, even though as far as he knew, it was consensual. Like I definitely always said yes, but in my mind I wasn't. And so inside I started feeling a lot of resentment towards him. And I just started feeling very broken. I started really, really hating myself.
I mean, I'm just thinking about, again, Princess and the Pea, or, that repentance thing you did in high school where you're you're putting yourself on the altar, the sacrificial altar, silencing your inner voice, and just conforming to what the church tells you is right.
Yes, absolutely. And the church plays a huge part in this too. David got some terrible sexual advice from some church leaders in his efforts to try to search like what to do from his part. I got some pretty terrible advice also. For a long time, I thought just all women felt like me and like this was like what you did as a wife. When I started discovering that women really enjoyed having those relationships with their husband, that was a really hard pill for me to swallow because it made me start thinking, did I do it wrong? Like what's going on with me?
What was the bad advice y'all got?
Oh my gosh. Like we would get the advice that, the man needs it, like they need it. So you have to find a way to make it happen. He got the advice from leaders to ask for sex when he wanted it, which isn't a terrible advice, but the way they kind of made it sound was like, schedule something. Schedule something. The reason that was bad is because there was no conversation regarding consent. There was no option for me to say no. I was going to eventually have to say yes. Like, okay, I could say no today, but then we would have to schedule it for a week. And I for sure had to say yes. And if I said no again, that would be real problematic. And David didn't have the tools that he needed at the time to kind of recover from that rejection. You have to understand he was getting rejected a lot. And that feels terrible.
Well, how would it feel if your spouse isn't into you? Exactly.
And so it was really weighing on him too. We were both kind of hating ourselves. And finally, after 8 years, it's important to note also at this time, I was really digging into the church. Like the church gives you a recipe for if things are not successful, then do ABC, right? I was very confused because I felt like I'd done everything right according to this church, but I was not finding the happiness that I wanted in my marriage or the happiness in my own personal self either. But I just kept on doing the recipe that they were giving me, which was, attend church, read your patriarchal blessing, read the scriptures, pray more. I actually get very sensitive to people when they say, well, maybe you haven't read so-and-so scripture or something like that. And I cannot express enough. I read the scriptures a lot, and a lot of members do. I think especially people who've never been Mormon, they don't realize we read a lot of scriptures. We read the Old Testament, we read the New Testament, we read the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. And I was reading those on repeat over and over and over again. But that was really all that the church could offer you. And the idea was that if those things aren't working, like you said earlier, then maybe there's a problem with you. Like I was the problem.
Yeah. One thing I'm just feeling so deeply right now is, number one, normalizing the experience of what happens when your whole value is tied to something, purity. Mm-hmm. And it's literally don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, and then you can do it. And I know Natasha Helfer, a sex therapist friend, had a whole program for around weddings for people in the church so that they actually didn't have sex the night they got married. It was a very step by step over time. It acknowledged actually psychologically, what the feat is, what you're actually up against, right. I think, which is just very validating, and I think this normalizes. I know a lot of women that have struggled in their story with this part, and even beyond this 8-year where it feels like to me, and when my emotional reaction to you describing it was around the story you created about yourself. I think this experience of women who don't know their sexual selves going into a relationship, so you don't know what you don't know, and that's one thing. It's like living in a vacuum and you don't have resources and you don't have education, and that's one thing, and I feel for that, and a lot of women I know have stories like that. I think my own story, I have a lot of aspects of that too, but it's the heartbreaking part is the story, like what you're telling yourself about yourself during that time, and the judgments that you have, and it's heartbreaking. It's just that is pain, that you did not need on top of everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned Natasha Helfer, because right around this time, some friends started sending me some information from Dr. Finlayson Fife and from Natasha Helfer. But here's the thing, and I know that they're both cognizant of this. I didn't even feel like I could listen to it.
Yeah.
Well, the church excommunicated Natasha.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was scared. And some of the things they would say also at my mind then felt ludicrous. Like, I remember listening to an episode from Dr. Finlayson Fife, and she said, you should never have to have sex if you don't want it. And I was like, she's wrong. She's absolutely wrong. And because I didn't have any sort of cognizance of what it was like to know myself and to be in a relationship where we understood that about each other. I didn't understand what a healthy sexual life was like. And I also felt very nervous to find resources. And I don't feel like the church does a good job of encouraging looking for those resources, like you were saying, like all the young girls that do go through that.
That's right. And even this idea of choice, I can understand for you hearing, Dr. Finlayson Fife say something to the effect of like, well, consent and you have a choice. You don't have to.
Yeah.
But growing up in the context, I think, for a lot of Mormon women, and particularly with some of the layers of your story, choice, you actually making a decision independent of a man or a man's preference or that was dangerous to you in the past. Like, you had these impactful experiences of like, oh wait, I've learned not to do that. I've actually learned that that's dangerous to me. Right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It was interesting because I had this BYU Idaho professor who taught religion courses, and I really respected him at the time, but he actually talked a lot about like the authoritative line, kind of. I remember him giving this talk about bishop versus first counselor, that kind of thing. And he was a first counselor in a bishopric, and he said he never disagreed with his bishop because he felt like it was not his place. He really talked about like this priesthood line of power. And I remember him also tying that also to marriage. And I think I took that to heart because when David and I were married, I'm way more of a dominant personality than he is. He's very reserved. And I remember giving him a lecture in our first year of marriage, being like, you got to step it up, bud, because I'm just going to run all over you. And I'm not supposed to be running all over you. You're supposed to be running all over me, kind of thing. Like, you're supposed to be leading.
This is our template for relationships.
Exactly.
Someone's running all over someone.
Exactly. And so I felt like I was supposed to be the supporter and he was supposed to be the head. And in every aspect of our marriage, I was always kind of trying to push him to do that. And I was always trying to be more submissive. Like with like scripture study and prayer, David would never be like, hey, let's pray. So I'd be like, like nudging him, like, David, you got to tell the room that we're going to pray and you got to assign somebody, because I was kind of the one enforcing that. So it's interesting when it came to intimacy, I also was definitely giving deference to him. Like I have had the ability to step up maybe, but I hadn't learned to trust myself.
Yeah.
Another thing Natasha and I'm imagining Jennifer teach or have taught is that if a woman can explore her own body, then she might know what brings her pleasure, which might enhance the mutual relationship.
Right.
And I would not imagine that would have been received well by you if you had heard that in your full Mormon self.
No. And another BYU Idaho story. Man, BYU Idaho is crazy. So there was this class. It was like I don't remember what it was called, but it was like an intro to family marriage. And you weren't allowed to take it actually until you were married because they talked about things.
They talked about intimacy.
And this is how they talked about intimacy. One of the big issues was like, well, what do you do with your garments when you're intimate? You're supposed to wear your garments all the time. So like, can you take them off? There was a heavy debate in this classroom about this. And eventually the teacher, professor, sister says, it's appropriate for you to, I'm not making fun of the sister. I'm so sorry. I took it very seriously at the time. It's appropriate for you to take off your garments when you're about to be intimate with your husband and fold them and place them under your pillow.
Under your pillow.
And then have the act. and then put them back on. So the way I was preparing myself for sex, as you can see, there was no sort of like
hotness.
No. And I mean,
steamy.
Or being in the moment.
Yes.
Or, yep.
It's like, let's fold up our garments.
Yes.
Let's put them under the
It's garment folding time. Yeah.
Are yours under your
crazy.
pillow? Wait, you didn't fold this.
I'm ready.
Go
Yes,
back.
I'm ready. Refold those garments, please. That's exactly it. So there was no self-exploration. And then David again kind of suggested I go on that path. I remember when he said it, I wrote this in my outline too. The breaking point for us was I just really couldn't hate myself anymore when it came to our sexual relationship. I thought I was all the problem. And because David is a very kind man, he was like, hey, like, you're not the problem. And he's like, and I feel like crap making you feel worse. So we are not going to have sex unless you want to. And I said, well, then we will never have sex. And he said, that's okay. And then he kind of nudged me in the direction of trying to figure myself out in that way.
Because sometimes a person, a Mormon woman or man, will find out that they're gay, for example, because they never got to experiment with that beforehand, and they find out that that's the problem.
Or asexual, or very low desire.
Right. So I approached the first 8 to 10 years of our marriage, I approached it as I was just a very low desire person who hated sex and, all these things. And you can definitely be a low desire person. I have since found that it is much more complex than that. And that is not really the case.
Yep.
But for all those years, having been bottled up for so much and I can't stress enough, we didn't have that compatibility. That's the number one thing David and I learned about ourselves. We didn't have the compatibility, and it is important to have that. Mm-hmm. So that kind of led us to, I don't know if we're ready to move on to this point, but it led us to, we had 2 boys by this point, I should say. And we were really broken in our marriage at this point. I remember a friend suggesting that we separate, and I was like aghast. I'm like, it's not happening. Like, I made a covenant in this marriage and we are taking it to the end. But David was pretty miserable. A very strange thing also about our marriage is him and I do not fight. We just don't. We're very good friends. So we talk very reasonably to each other. This confuses so many of our friends. And I know there's so many friends who are going to be listening right now who are going to be like shocked by all this information because they consider us, me and David, just very close knit because we don't fight. So during this time, it was not contentious in that way. Like, we weren't yelling at each other. We were being successful parents. We were managing the house and our relationship together, but intimacy was not there at all. I had just had my second son, and I started to go crazy over garments. For anyone who has had a baby and experienced the fluctuation of hormones, you understand that like certain things just happen. And for me, after my second son, I couldn't stand to have like anything on my body. I didn't like anything tight fitting. And it was driving me crazy to wear garments. I literally wanted to rip them off my body. And of course, I felt so much guilt about this because you're supposed to wear them at all times. So I started going into this extreme deep dive of why we wear garments. And I knew the textbook answer. Like, we wear garments because it's a representation of our covenants to God. Like, we receive our garments after we're endowed in the temple. It's a representation of God. But for me, also, we haven't talked about it, but I have a degree in English analysis. Research is very important to me. I felt at the time like I was very passionate about information. And at the time, I really thought that I knew a lot about the church. And I did in reference to church sources. I knew a lot about church sources. I had read so much about the history of the church, but only from trusted church sources. because I felt that they had all the information. So I thought, surely I will find out all the information I need to know about garments. I really need to know why they ever happened. Like, are we wearing these in heaven when we die? Like, did God tell us to wear? Like, why?
You're
What
like,
is
how
it?
long am I going to be wearing
Yes,
these?
exactly.
Is there an end date?
That's right.
Exactly. So
Could I get a silver medal? I'm okay with maybe a silver medal with the garments.
I think too, I was envisioning, I remember hoping like, oh man, I hope we don't wear these in heaven. And if we do, I hope they're like prettier. Like I hope they're different.
That's right.
So like maybe like a slip, like a cute slip or something. I didn't know, but it was driving me crazy.
Because they just came out with a garment slip. Did you know that?
No.
Oh, you didn't know that?
Yeah.
No.
Just in the past couple weeks,
Think
they've
about
come out
that.
they've come out with new garments.
That might have saved me.
And there's
they
a
should have
slip.
come up
There's
with
a slip option
5
now
years
for
ago.
women.
Like if you wear a
bottom
dress,
slip.
you don't have to wear the
The
short.
biker shorts.
That's huge.
Yeah, well, you're a prophet.
Does this when you're a prophet?
And their sleeve. No, I'd say you were
me.
a prophet.
I was a prophet. Yeah. So
Because
wait, do they have sleeves on them?
They just
slips?
came out with women
Okay.
garment tops that are sleeveless.
Wow. That's
We just did an
incredible.
episode on it last week.
That is mind blowing to me because I know to young people in the church these days, this feels very normal and this feels like this is what the church is. This was not what the church was when I was growing up.
Right.
So it is astonishing to me when they make big changes. And to me, that's huge.
Oh, there are these, we have to show you on Instagram and TikTok now. There are these influencer young Mormon women that are like, where are my garment girlies? Look at this sleeveless dress I get to wear to church.
Yes.
You know, and form-fitting things and their slip under their shorter skirt, and it's become a thing.
I mean, I totally would have been with those girlies if I had still been in the church. I would have been so excited about that. But from the outside looking in, it does feel disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you had to go through what?
I mean, I had to wear them or risk damnation. That sounds dramatic, but that is how serious it was in my mind.
Yeah. Well, enough to make you question the church.
Exactly. And so I was thinking in my head, if I just know the origin of garments, I'll be able to figure it out. I'll be able to make this work in my mind. And I thought it's got to be with the origin has to be with Joseph Smith, right? So I did start doing the deep dive through all church sources. So unhelpful. There's really not a lot of information about garments in reference to like historical information
And
about
that's because
garments.
they come from the Masonic Lodge. Joseph Smith was a Mason, and he got the temple ceremony and the garments, as I understand it, from the Masons. So the church says it's sacred, but really it's Masonic. And so they don't want people digging into it like you did, honestly.
Right. And at the time, I knew none of that, right? I didn't know about the Masonic symbols, which is crazy because it's very obvious.
Yeah,
but
the
I
compass
didn't.
and the square. Yeah.
I just hadn't done my research on masonry, I guess. I don't know. I remember a brother of mine had mentioned it right around this time. He said the reason, because all of my siblings are not active.
Oh,
Yeah.
all 5 are out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My poor parents. I mean, I do really feel for them because they're looking at themselves saying, what did we do wrong? We did everything that we were supposed to do. And we were supposed to have this multi-generational family passing the church along, and they're not going to have that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I remember my brother kind of mentioning offhand what broke him was all the Masonic stuff. And I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. So nothing. So I start looking at church sources because the church tells you point blank, we have the information. Don't go looking for the information outside of our sources because, I mean, basically I don't want to say it's Satan, but that's the idea, right? It's people trying to slip up the church. You're going to lose your faith if you look at information around the church, and you don't need to because we're telling you the truth. Okay. So I did that. I looked at all the church sources, and the best I could come up with as to why we wore our garments was Joseph Smith had been inspired by God to create this garment. You can look up pictures of it. It used to be like this one piece.
That went to your wrists and your ankles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I also found out that the original idea, which this makes sense in reference to masonry, was that you only wore it during, like rituals, making covenants. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that makes sense to me. Like, it makes sense to wear a garment in the temple. It would even make sense to me to wear a garment on Sunday when we're partaking of the sacrament. It didn't make sense to me to wear it all the time. Because you look at Christians, I have so many Christian friends, and they wear a cross, right? And that cross for them symbolizes their devotion to Jesus.
You don't need long underwear, basically.
Right. You don't need this really unattractive, long underwear. And I was going out of my mind. Yes, I was nursing. I was
healing from a vaginal birth, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And none of that is ever taken into account. And it's kind of an unspoken rule. I mean, there's grace there. Moms will say, if you don't feel like you can wear it today, like, that's fine. We understand you're nursing. Like, that's kind of it. But then you also know there's a timetable on it. Like, well, as soon as I stop nursing, I have to
and also
get back to it.
You're being watched. Like, people do notice the lines of garments and if you're wearing them or not.
They're policing your underwear, honestly. I mean, that's a thing in Mormonism.
Oh, yes. They definitely want to know if you're wearing your garments. And before I started doing this garment research, because of this issue I was having postpartum, it's a natural thing. I say issue, that sounds negative. It's just because of all the changes I was going through, I really was not feeling comfortable in dresses. So I started wearing pants to church. I had bought this really cute pantsuit for a work event of my husband's, and I never got to wear it. And it was driving me crazy. And it was one of the only things I felt pretty in postpartum. So I started wearing it to church. And women don't wear pants. They do now, kind of, but they didn't back then. And it was shocking. It was shocking.
No, 10 years ago or whatever, there was a Mormon women wear pants to church day.
It was like a movement.
Led by kind of the precursors to the ordained women movement, Mormon feminists. And it was like a national news story that Mormon women were bucking authority and wearing pants to church. It was the thing. It was a big thing.
And so you bringing that up, exactly. So what does wearing pants to church mean? Bucking authority.
That's right. You're kind of radical.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I remember.
How was it received? When you do it.
With love and sarcasm and discomfort. But it was shocking for people. My friends started calling me the feminist, which is hilarious, as if that's a bad thing, Some people really liked it, and some girls started wearing pants to church too. My mom was just horrified, bless her, because first, she's British, so she's so proper, and then second, the whole church thing. But then at the same time, she was kind of proud. So, but yeah, people would start making jokes as soon as and this is even before I really started my faith crisis. People would make jokes when I wore the pants. They'd say, "Oh, like, are you on your way out?" That kind of thing, or like, "Now you're a feminist." And they said it with love, like they still loved me. They were happy I was there. They got used to the pants, but it was a symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the slippery slope. Pants with the slippery slope.
Pants with the slippery slope. So then we get back to garments, and I understood from all the historical stuff that I had read about Joseph Smith. We wore garments when we did rituals. That started making sense, but it just didn't feel like enough information. My friends knew that I was struggling with this really hardcore, and one of my friends said, "Hey, I found this like Q&A randomly on YouTube. It was a Mormon Stories Q&A. And she said, you should watch it. It might have information. It's called Mormon Stories. So I was like, perfect. This is going to have the information that I need. And I don't remember what the title was, but it made me feel like maybe you could have talked about garments in there. I don't think y'all ever talked about garments, but there were some other things that were mentioned. And one of the things that was mentioned was the CES letter. Something else that was mentioned was Fanny Alger. And like I said before, research and information is very important to me. I felt like I was a very well-studied person when it came to Mormon topics, Mormon scriptures, and Mormon history. And I was not familiar with the name Fanny Alger at all. And that very much bothered me. I was like, I'm not going to be the person who doesn't know about Fanny Alger. It's Alger, isn't it? I don't know how to pronounce it. But I'm not going to be the person who doesn't know about her. I just assumed, apparently everybody knows about her, and I don't know about her.
And our Never Mormons are like, who in the heck is Fanny Alger?
Exactly. And
so who is she? Tell us who she is.
So Fanny Alger was a young woman who worked in Joseph Smith and Emma Smith's household. Was she 17 at the time, 16 or 17?
Yeah, she was mid-teens.
She worked
not
in there.
Not an adult is the point.
Not an adult, yes, not 18, which is the important thing. She worked in their household, and Joseph Smith started having some sort of relationship with her. Dirty, filthy affair. Isn't that the quote?
Dirty, nasty, filthy affairs.
Yeah, dirty, nasty, filthy affair. The reason we have that quote is because Oliver Cowdery caught them doing something in a barn.
Yeah.
You can guess what that something was, and he called it a dirty, filthy, nasty affair, which to me meant that they had sex.
Yeah. And I just recently reread this account. It may have even been Emma that saw Joseph and Fanny through the barn. And then it got related to Oliver. And then, but Mormons, Oliver's a big deal because he was one of the scribes to the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
He's one of the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. And at the time he found out about Fanny, he was like co-president of the church.
Yes.
So you really don't get any higher than Oliver Cowdery.
Yes. And if you understand Mormon history, you also understand this is kind of like this is a catalyst incident. Fanny. And so from Oliver's point of view, what he was building with Joseph was one thing. He had an idea of what he was building with Joseph, and he was not happy about what went on between Joseph and Fanny.
Because adultery is forbidden in all Christian churches.
Yes.
But polygamy was even forbidden in Mormonism in 1835 or 1836.
Exactly.
So there was no reason Joseph would be having sex with a teenage girl who worked in his house. There's no good reason.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly correct. And, Oliver Cowdery recognized this and brought it to light. It was disturbing to him. And then they excommunicated him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that was a problem when you learned it for you.
Huge problem. So when I originally heard the name Fanny Alger and CES letter, I didn't think anything of them because I had no context. But then I started doing my research and I found out what you said. It was extremely disturbing. I grew up, and then after I read those things, I read the full CES letter, and I was able to explain away so much of it. I mean, I read everything about the Book of Mormon and the anachronisms, and I was like, oh, we just don't know yet. God will make it clear. Maybe those skeletons are buried really deep under the ground. Maybe they've been brought up to heaven. I was able to explain away all the things. But then when I started reading about Joseph's relationships with women, the true nature of his polygamy, it was clear as daylight to me. It was wrong. And what's crazy is a big reason I think it's wrong is because of my Mormon upbringing. I knew it was morally incorrect. And just like that, I was done. I remember having this thought in my head because I was still fully believing at that point. I remember thinking, even if this is the true church, I cannot morally follow this man who formed this church.
You mentioned Helen Mar Kimball, another one of Joseph's wives. And by the way, now the Mormon Church is trying to write off Fanny Alger as Joseph's first polygamous wife.
Right.
So wife number 2 after Emma in theory, and that God somehow approved it. The problem is the Fanny Alger thing happened in like 1835, 1836. The sealing power didn't even come. The power to seal couples together in eternal marriages didn't come until a couple of years after Fanny. And then the polygamy revelation didn't come until like 1843 or 1844. So there's no way to really spin Fanny Alger as a polygamous wife, even though the church tries to do that now. But you mentioned in your outline Helen Mar Kimball as being a deal breaker as well. Do you want to say why? And she was one of Joseph's 34 wives. Why was Helen's story particularly problematic for you?
Yes. Well, I should just mention just right before this is it's not like it is now. I grew up not thinking Joseph really participated in polygamy. And when I did find out that he did participate in polygamy, it was in college and it was dressed up as, the Lord told him he had to because he inquired, because there's that scripture about oh, well, because you asked about it now, you got to follow it. And he was a reluctant follower of polygamy. He really loved.
God threatened him with death if he didn't have sex with 30 women.
Exactly so. And that also he wasn't intimate with these women. That's another thing.
That they said.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how I understood it in college.
Which isn't true.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that he loved his wife and all those types of things. So then I come to find these real sources, and I cannot emphasize enough real sources. These are not made up sources because
they're sources the church now in 2025 acknowledge as being factual. But 10, 20 years ago, they were still trying to hide or deny these sources.
Right. And an example of these sources is Helen Mar Kimball's journal entries written by her own hand. So this is from Helen Mar Kimball. So Helen Mar Kimball was a 14-year-old girl. She was the daughter of Heber C. Kimball, who was high-ranking in the church. It was very important for Heber C. Kimball to be in good favor with Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith approached them about, I don't know if he approached Helen directly or if he approached, I don't remember, but he approached the family about marrying Helen Mar.
Weirdly, he first approached Heber about marrying his wife.
That's right.
And he actually got Heber to consent to let him, Joseph, marry Heber's wife. And then Joseph said, no, I'm just kidding. That was just a test.
Yeah, give me Helen.
Right. But I do want your daughter.
Yes.
Who's 14. Yeah.
Right. And when you read Helen Mar Kimball's journal entry, that's all it took, was reading her journal entry for me, because it was so obvious to me, and maybe this is the little girl, Jennie, talking. It was so obvious to me that her inner voice was saying she didn't want to do this, because she writes basically that her mom, when she got the news that Joseph Smith wanted her to be his wife, her mom was devastated and didn't want her to do it and knew the hard life that she would have if she did. Helen talks about, you know, I'm summarizing here, but basically how she also didn't want to, but upon reflection, she was going to do the right thing for her family and the right thing for the Lord.
Your Princess and the Pea story.
Exactly. So maybe that's why it resonated with me, but it was very obvious to me that, first of all, that feels pretty, on Joseph Smith's part, that feels like pretty predatory behavior, especially since I found out later this isn't a sole incident. He did this often with girls.
He was like 36, 37 at the time. He wanted this 14-year-old girl. Yeah.
And even if we were to take the argument, okay, so the argument, of course, is he just married Helen to like link their families. He never had sex with her, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Even if that were the case.
Which is probably untrue.
Which is probably untrue. And I fully believe he definitely had sexual relationships with most of these women.
Well, the church acknowledges that now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if it were true that he didn't, he still married a 14-year-old girl and put her in isolation, because what people don't realize, and she writes about this in her journal, is that she could no longer go to social events. There was actually a boy that she had been interested in that she writes about, and she was no longer to see that, like she couldn't see that boy anymore. She couldn't go to social events anymore. She had to just stay in her home and be Joseph's secret wife.
And it was secret because it was illegal, and so Joseph was lying to the world about it.
Lying to the world and his church.
Yeah, yeah.
His own church, his own people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then...
And his wife.
And his wife, who was not happy about it. Emma wasn't sitting over here like, oh, I know it's what the Lord wants. She was very upset.
Yeah.
She, you know, I think if you were, is just a guess, but from a woman's point of view and from everything I've read, if we were to sit Emma Smith down here and really talk about Joseph, she would say, my husband had a major issue with adultery.
Oh, for sure.
And I mean, my heart breaks for her because of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I've had so many people, when I tell them the Helen Mar Kimball, where they say, this is the worst retort ever, where they go, oh, well, you know, it was so common back then for men to marry 14-year-old girls. It wasn't that common. And Joseph Smith had no reason to marry her. Like really no reason. He deprived her of her own personal happiness by forcing that upon her. And if we're talking about it being a revelation from God for him to choose Helen, why would God want her to suffer like that? It didn't make sense to me. So that's why when I read that story, I just knew instantly, morally, it was wrong. And then I was out after that. Like I said before, I had this thought in my head. I was like, even if the church is true, I cannot, in good conscience, be a part of it anymore because of this history. Besides the fact that it was all hidden from me, truly hidden and lied about. I saw this TikToker the other day talking about how the church doesn't hide information. I was like, it definitely did when I was younger. And I know it still does now, but it definitely did when I was younger. So besides the fact that this stuff was hidden and lied about, it's like extremely immoral in my opinion. And so I was out after that.
Yeah. Can I talk, going back to this idea of consent, can a 14-year-old girl consent when her parents are telling her that a prophet of God has chosen her to be his special 20x 25th wife?
Yeah.
You know, in 1840, whatever, right? Is consent even possible for a 14-year-old girl?
I don't think so. And if it were me, if I were Helen Mar Kimball and it were me, I would have done exactly what Helen said. I would have not wanted to marry this old man. He was an old man.
Who had 30 other wives.
Yes.
Right?
I would not have wanted to. Most 14-year-old girls don't look at almost 40-year-old men and say, I want to marry them. They look at 14, 15, 16-year-old boys and say, he's cute. You know, that's just how it gets different as we get older. But like when we're young, that's what we want. And so if it were me, if I were Helen Mar Kimball, I would have in my head said no, but absolutely done what my parents wanted me to do. And I think that's, in a way, abuse, right?
Oh, not just in a way. It's some of the worst possible kinds of abuse.
Yes.
Yeah. So as you're actually digging in and learning things, are you sharing in real time with your husband? Are you doing this alone? Or...
I am doing this alone. David and I are very different personalities, and I'm a knowledge seeker, and he's just happy to get along. And so I'm doing like the deep dive, and I'm kind of also a crusader. So I was sharing all of this with him. I was like, can you believe? And I don't know that he really cared. But when I brought to light to him that I was going to stop, I was done. I was going to stop going to church. He said, oh, thank God. I haven't wanted to go for years.
Wow.
So
And he didn't feel comfortable telling you.
He did not. And different things kind of were the red flags for David. He's an accountant. So I need not tell you what the red flag was. It's money.
Oh, so like
Right.
Ensign Peak and the church's $300 billion and the
makes
SEC
Right.
and the IRS fraud and scandal.
And what's crazy, and I'm going to give David major props here. This was before we knew about that stuff.
Oh.
But David's an accountant and he audits nonprofits. And I remember him bringing this up to me about a year before I did my deep dive. I was like, you're ridiculous. And he's like, it's really weird that the church doesn't give a full report of their financials.
It isn't transparent.
It's not transparent. He said, because that's required.
For all 501c3s that aren't churches, right?
Yes. And he said, and it's also really weird that all their auditing is done in-house. And he just didn't feel right about it.
Yeah, they don't use external Big Four accounting firm auditors.
Yeah. And so from an auditing accountant standpoint, he was like, something's up.
Yeah.
And he was done paying tithing. There was this incident in our marriage. I got very upset with him about it, actually. This is when we were both very faithful before I had a faith crisis. He didn't pay tithing for a year, and I didn't know until tithing settlement. And I was so mad at him, like so mad. That almost broke our marriage in that moment. I was so upset first that he had lied about it and he did lie to me about it for a year and he told me later, he's like, I was afraid to tell you because I thought if I told you, you'd make me pay it. And I was like, well, of course I would. I was upset because I felt like he was making the decision for two people instead of just one, because his income represented also my income. So that meant I had not paid full tithing for an entire year either. So I was very upset about it. But so the point of telling that story is he had been thinking about it for a while. It had been bothering him for a while.
Yeah.
It wasn't your fault. You didn't lead him out.
No. And it made the transition out easy because I didn't have David begging me to stay. And then we had to decide what we wanted to do about our kids for about 6 months. My oldest at this time had been participating in primary and he really loved it. He would tell people all the time, I love Jesus. I didn't want to kill that. I also didn't want to give him the same upbringing I had. I didn't want to strip him of choice. I wanted him to decide for himself. So for about 6 months, I took him to church still. And then after about 6 months, I started asking him if he wanted to go. And for a while he did. And then I would go with him when he wanted to go. And then I kept asking and he started saying he didn't want to go. So we didn't go. And then I started asking him if he wanted to go to different churches. And we tried a few other churches. And now we basically don't attend anything currently. He believes in Jesus, but that's been developed on his own and we don't discourage it at all.
Yeah. Let our kids have their own journeys.
Yeah.
Don't be an extrinsic, authoritative, forceful force in our children's lives. Don't pass down, that tradition, right?
That's the hope.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll achieve it, but I'm trying.
Yeah. Okay, so how many years ago did you and David just kind of leave the Mormon church?
It's been about 4 years ago.
Okay. So 4 years ago, you both mutually arrive at the conclusion that the church isn't true.
Yes.
And you're going to stop going.
Yes.
And by that point, how many years had you been in sort of a intimacy-less marriage in terms of, certain types of intimacy?
Yeah. At that point, we had been married about 11 years and we had struggled from the beginning.
So that's 11 years of being in a marriage that wasn't feeling right to you from the beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
And so then leaving the church gave me courage to start deciding who I was and what I wanted. And I realized when I left that I had never done that work. So the first thing that I did was I tried to get a job. At this point, my kids were 6 and 3. And I decided that I wanted to try to become financially independent. David and I were both starting to lean towards separating. So I thought, man, I really got to get my feet under me. So that's when I became a teacher. I taught high school English and I really, really loved it. And I worked full time and I mommed full time. And David and I did separate for about a year.
And how was that? How did that feel? How did you process that?
Yeah, because that's not a trivial thing.
No.
To be Mormon your whole life and then to have children and your husband's the primary breadwinner. And then all of a sudden you're leaving the church and going back into the workplace with young kids?
Yes, and having a full-on existential crisis at the time. I don't know if people in the church really appreciate how hard it is to leave. Because you really want the Mormon church to be true. It provides a lot of safety, and it also gives you the path, right? But then when you leave, you have to decide what you believe. It can be very scary.
You got to figure it all out. And there are a lot of ways you can experience joy, but also danger and get in trouble, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a Mormon would say, well, that's why you don't leave the church. But me, with my having experienced what I've experienced, I would say, well, that is life. Like, that's the beauty of life is finding it out, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes and doing better. You're going to make mistakes. Yeah. So it was huge. Separating was very, very hard. And I can't emphasize that enough. Our marriage is still a little bit in limbo, and it still continues to be hard because David and I are so devoted to our children. He's a wonderful father, and I try to be a good mother. I mean, I'm as devoted to my kids as any mom. And we really want also each of us to be okay. We want each of us to be okay financially. And it was the same at the time. David was quite upset at this time more than he is now, and I totally understand it. I was both freaking out because I'm having this existential crisis. I am going back to work. I'm juggling motherhood with it. I'm separated, but I was also excited to finally explore and figure out who I was. I loved working. I loved being in the education sphere of English again with my colleagues. Teachers are so smart. I mean, my colleagues, I had the best conversations with them. I felt like I was in college again, like the things that they would talk about, the things that they were reading, the things that they were finding out about. I loved doing that, and I loved my students. And David and I had both decided that we would also date other people at this time.
Okay. Yeah, that is a lot. That is a full life.
That's too much.
For sure.
It was a lot. And we did both participate in dating. And if you've ever dated when you're older or you're exiting a marriage, I mean, it isn't like fun. It's hard. Yeah. But we both were with two different people. He had kind of a successful little mini relationship with a woman. And then I was with somebody that I absolutely adored. I fell head over heels for this person. I was just totally wrapped up because it was the first time I had entered a relationship with somebody where I felt what you should feel. I mean, just
Since high school.
Since high school,
Yeah.
yes. So chemistry, attraction, safety, we just got along. There was like a magnetism. We had the right personalities that meshed with each other, all of the things.
I love that. And I love, too, a little different than high school because not hiding it, not feeling shame necessarily about it, being able to be, and you actually trying to tap into who you are and what you want. So the innie and outie kind of whole thing, not necessarily being there in the same way. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And my goal, I remember I made mental goals when I left the church, and one of my number one goals was learning to listen to myself again.
Yeah.
And my voice was shouting to go for it with this guy. And so I did. And it felt amazing. But then this is where life kicks in, right? This is the lesson of life. Eventually that ended, and it wasn't by my choice. And it was kind of a little bit of a traumatic ending of that relationship. Like I would have continued that relationship and gone as far as I could go with it. But he made a different choice, and that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking. And it did leave me a little bit of a moment. I had a moment where I was like, okay, like I was listening to my voice. My voice told me go for it, and it didn't pan out. But my perspective on that now is, that is life. It doesn't mean you shouldn't follow your voice. Like young Jennie would have said, that means you shouldn't follow your voice. But now it doesn't mean that you shouldn't not follow your voice. It's just that is what happens. I wasn't super equipped at that time to handle how that all went down. Like y'all have stated, there was a lot going on with everything that I was working through. I was terrified of being able to take care of my children financially. I knew I couldn't on a teacher's salary. I was so stressed out. Everything had just ended with this guy that I was with. And I was so stressed, I was barely sleeping. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, an hour a night for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't eating. I couldn't eat. And so I lost 15 pounds. And that was a wake-up call for me, too. It was a learning experience. Losing weight isn't always a great thing. I wasn't in a healthy place. I was just barely functioning. I think I was holding it together okay for my kids, but inside I was just numb. Very, very depressed, to the point where I was starting to have intrusive thoughts, very scary thoughts, things like, it'd be better if you weren't here. Why are you even here? What are you even doing? Your children would be better off without you. Things like that. And that was very scary. They never turned into anything other than those thoughts. But David at this point recognized that I was struggling, and he was very worried. And so he moved back in full time. We were doing kind of like the separation we were doing was what we call nesting, where him and I would leave, the kids would always stay.
Right.
So he just stopped leaving, and he kind of moved in and really took care of all of us. So big props to David.
That is something.
Stand-up guy.
He is.
I love this too, because it also speaks to love. That love, it's not one thing. It's not, and so I love that, that love between you two. There were aspects that really changed and had to change during this time, but also there was a love preserved clearly there between you two.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. It makes me actually a little emotional, because I remember early on in our marriage, I used to complain to him that sometimes I felt like an object, like I was only loved for what I provided for him and not who I was.
Yes.
I've complimented him recently that he's done a fantastic job of showing me that he cares for me as a person, that I have value in who I am just as I am.
Yeah, that's
I could see the emotion coming up for you.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, so there's definitely love for David, and I know he feels the same. So that year was a great learning experience for us, because it taught us to put away any sort of animosity or resentment we had towards each other. We were very focused on making our family unit work. We knew then, and we know now, that our family unit looks very different than some other people's, but we also feel like we're family, like we have these children together. So during this time, we were just kind of coasting. I was continuing to work, and David and I had one night together where we were intimate. One. And this is not an exaggeration. People do not believe me. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, no, it was once. And I mean, once in years. And I got pregnant.
Wow. Yes.
And that was shocking. It was the first time I had ever gotten pregnant when I wasn't expecting it. And I didn't know how to feel. I was terrified, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I was expecting, David and I were still planning at this time on divorce. In fact, he had mentioned a few times, he was kind of like pushing me, not in a bad way, but saying, we're going to have to resolve what we want to do. And I think it's probably divorce. So that's the conversation we had been having. And so then I found out I was pregnant. I had these 2 young boys. I was working full time as a teacher, and I just didn't know how I was going to do it. So I didn't tell anybody about the pregnancy for 8 weeks. I just sat on it. I told my dog, but that's it.
Because dogs are trustworthy that way.
Dogs will never give away your secrets. They won't. So, and I sat on that pregnancy news, and then a cute, sweet friend of mine who she's become my best friend in recent years. I was out with her and our children, and I was really tired and in a bad mood. And she's like, "What is going on with you?" And I just said, "I'm pregnant," like that. And she was shocked because she knew everything that was going on in my life. And she said, "Okay, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together." And that's what I needed to hear. And then she said, "Have you told David?" And I said, "No, I haven't told David."
Oh,
I hadn't told David.
Oh, David didn't know.
David didn't know. I hadn't told David. And she said, "Have you made a doctor's appointment?" And I said, "No, I haven't done that either." And she's like, "Well, that's what we're going to do." And she helped me make the appointment, and I went home that day and I told David.
How long ago was this?
Well, this was if we're thinking it would have been like April, May of 2023.
Wow.
Whoa.
And I was 8 weeks along.
So that's about 2 years ago.
8 weeks along. And at this point, so you've held this to yourself, a little dog confidence, but pretty much on your own for 8 weeks. And in your mind, are you thinking of we're still going forward with separating and divorcing? Like, did it alter your thought where you were like, oh, now, or were you kind of like, now I've got teaching, we've got, the whole separation plan, and we have another child? Like, how are you thinking about it in the 8 weeks where it's just you and this little life growing inside you?
Yeah. David and I had literally during this time been kind of like heating up the divorce talk. And so I fully expected that we were still going to get a divorce. After I told him about the pregnancy, he was shocked. He didn't react badly. I don't want to make it seem like he reacted badly, but he was shocked. And in the next coming week or so, we were talking about how it was all going to work with separation and divorce, but we were fully planning on moving forward with that. And then I went to the doctor's office, and I took my oldest son with me and this made me really excited about the pregnancy. When I told my oldest I was pregnant, he was through the moon. He'd been begging me for a younger sibling. He had one, but he wanted another one. Specifically, he wanted a baby sister so badly. There's not a lot of girls in the Johnson family, so I told him, forget about it, kid. Not going to happen, So he was ecstatic. So for my first ultrasound appointment, I invited my son to come with me, which was really exciting. And we get there. I'm super nervous. We're with the ultrasound tech. My son is like beside me, just like so excited. And I'm like freaking out. The ultrasound tech comes in. She was no muss, no fuss. I mean, zero conversation. She got in there and like did her business. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I'm seeing stuff on the screen and I'm like, there's my ovaries, I think, I don't know what I'm seeing. And then I noticed that the ultrasound tech is not talking. And it was in this moment, she's rubbing this wand over my belly. My son's so excited. I'm trying to play it cool because I don't want him to be worried, but I'm thinking in my head, oh my gosh, she's not finding anything. She's not finding a heartbeat. And it was in that moment that I realized I want this baby so badly. Anyway, sorry. Y'all will see why this is emotional later, but she wrote something on her screen and I glanced at it and I thought it said 2. And then I looked at her and she looked back at me and she just went like this. And I said, "Are you telling me that I'm carrying twins?" And she said, "Yeah." And my son just woohooed. He jumped up. He started screaming. He was so excited. I just started bawling. Not because I was sad, not because I was freaked out, but because I was so happy. And that feeling surprised me because I had been so stressed out.
Yeah.
And I just knew, I was like, this situation is just so crazy not to be a full-on miracle. Like, I never should have gotten pregnant with a baby to begin with. I did, and now it's twins. And then I found out later that they were identical twin girls, and I was just through the moon, just so excited. I had always wanted girls, and not to diminish my boys, and then my son also wanted a baby sister so badly. So it was just really, really special. I came home and told David, my son and I decided to go and buy matching twin outfits at the store. We came home, gave them the present. He opened it, and then he looked at the outfits and he realized it was twins, and he was shocked. And then it was in that moment that I approached him later and I said, I can't do this by myself. And he said, "You will not have to. I'm here however you need me, every step of the way." So yeah.
That story.
So how did that develop?
So twin pregnancy, I don't know how much our listeners know about twin pregnancy. It's no joke. If you are pregnant with twins or more than twins, it's totally crazy. It was a very difficult pregnancy. You're double everything, double exhausted, double nauseous, double in pain, double discomfort, all the things. It was a very difficult pregnancy. My girls were what they call mono-die. What that means, and it's important to the story later, is that they both had their own little sacs, so their own little homes that they lived in, but they shared a placenta. They shared a food source. Their umbilical cords were both connected to the same placenta.
Okay.
So it's a more high-risk pregnancy. It's not the most high-risk pregnancy, but it's one of the more high-risk pregnancy for twins.
Ideally, they both have their own placentas. Okay.
Yeah, and there's lots of reasons for this. When 2 babies share a placenta, if anything happens to one of the babies in utero, the other baby is also affected. So that's super high concern. And then also babies that share a placenta, there's just a lot of things that they look out for that they kind of expect could be a complication. So they told me this from the beginning. The minute you find out you're pregnant with twins, you learn all the scary information. And it's also a very different type of pregnancy in reference to how they monitor you. So right around 20 weeks, I started being monitored every 2 weeks, getting 2 to 4 hour long ultrasounds done.
Wow.
Difficult for work.
That's right.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
So I ended up being paid a lot less by the time I had my girls because I had to take so many days off because of this high risk pregnancy. So then at about 26 weeks, my MFM is what they're called. They monitor, maternal fetal medicine doctor. They monitor your babies. They were doing a really in-depth ultrasound and they flagged one of the twins as maybe having an issue. So my twin, and I'll go ahead and name them because it's just easier. The twin Elena, who's what we call twin A. She was the twin that technically formed first. Elena looked normal. She just checked out fine. Everything seemed fine. But twin B, which is our Isabel, our Izzy B, she flagged for potentially having a congenital heart defect. So then through other specialists, we were referred to a specialist children's hospital, Dell Children's in Austin, which is a fabulous, fabulous children's hospital. They actually have one of the best heart centers in the world.
Wow.
And it just developed about 5 years ago. they referred us to there, and they confirmed that she did have a congenital heart defect and that they were going to closely monitor her until she was born. So that kind of set us on a whole new path as to what this birth was going to look like. And it became less about, preparing for a birth of your child and going home, and more about how do we help this child survive. Step one was helping her survive in utero, because for a minute there, it looked like she wasn't growing. And as I said before, if she had passed in utero, Elena would have most likely also passed, and also potentially myself. The options as to what we could do if that were to happen were very limited, especially in Texas. And so they were monitoring me really closely. Thankfully, Isabel started growing really well, and they were not nervous that she would pass in utero. So then we just had to prepare for what it was going to be like once she was born.
And it took a tragic turn.
Yes. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how what it is to have a baby who's being born with a severe medical issue, because I think it's different than what people think. So my girls were born on Christmas Day, so December 25th of 2023, my Christmas miracles. And Elena came out perfectly great. They were by C-section. And then Isabel was taken immediately to be put on what they call the bubbler and to be taken into surgery. And I knew this beforehand. They had prepped us all really, really well with what it was going to look like. But what we knew was that we were not going to be able to hold her, and that she was going to be intubated immediately. For those who don't know,
through the throat, or
yeah, she was not going to be able to breathe on her own. And we knew this. So intubation, if anyone doesn't know, is a tube that's put down your throat and it helps you breathe. It's given for people sometimes in surgeries. Very rarely do people have to be intubated while they're awake for long term. Those who are, it's very, very uncomfortable. But in the medical world with infants, it's not rare to see like a heart baby like Isabel be intubated from birth.
Okay.
But this is what the intubation meant, because a lot of my friends were confused about this. When they knew that I had given birth to Isabel, they thought she was in the NICU and I was going there and kind of like holding her and then like putting her back on a bed. It was not like that at all. She was intubated. That tube could not be moved from her. And if it was, she could have passed away. And we were fighting for her life. The goal was to get her heart strong enough to where she could breathe on her own. And that required lots of different things. So that intubation tube had to stay intact. So she had to stay on bed, and I couldn't hold her. That was really hard because when you have a baby, one of the things they tell you about that's so important is the touch, the skin to skin. And I had that with Elena, and I couldn't have it with Isabel. And that was just tragic. It was tragic, not just for me, but I was extremely worried about Isabel, because a big reason they want the skin to skin isn't just for the health of the mother, it's especially for the health of the baby. Right. And so I knew that emotionally that there was just no way she was thriving without. I saw the way that Elena was thriving by being with me all the time. And Isabel was on a bed with all these things hooked up to her, and she was intubated. So her hospital stay was a little over 4 months.
Wow.
And we did that for 4 months. For 4 months.
She was intubated for 4 months. You couldn't hold her for 4 months.
We could hold her after 2 months, but the holding was, you can't really see it on camera, but like you couldn't move that tube. It took 3 different people to transfer her to bed to me, and they had to do it in such a way to where her tube would stay intact. So you had to be very careful. Like I'm trying to show on camera, but it's like you had to hold her very stiffly. You know, there was no like bringing up to here. There was no rocking and that kind of thing. We were with her every day. Sometimes David and I would kind of take each other's place. I was pretty much there with her 100% at the time. We live 45 minutes away from the hospital, so we'd drive up every day. Of course, we have our other children we were caring for, so we'd go home at night, we would take care of them, and then I would take the baby in the morning after I dropped the boys off for school, and I would be with Izzy as long as I could. And since I couldn't hold her most of the time, and even when I could, it was just very static, I just got really creative in all the other things that I wanted to do for her. I sang to her a lot, and the hospital helped me kind of know what I could and should do. I would hold her hands and her feet. I would get my face like right up to her face as much as I could, and I would just try to be this presence for her. I was hoping she was feeling that I was there. I tried when the girls were both young, I would put Elena in her bed a lot, which was always very scary because the intubation tube was there, but we would swaddle her up really good. And the nurses were so helpful too. Anything that they allowed me to do for Isabel, I would. Like at first I wasn't allowed to change her diapers because she was just so fragile. And then I got to where I could change her diapers. And I will tell you, it has never been more of a blessing to change a baby's diaper than to change hers. Like I would fight the nurses to change them if they came in. I'd say, no, I'm doing it, you know. I could give her sponge baths and things like that. And we did that for 4 months, and we were fighting for her life. And then about at the end of April, I came to see her one day, and I could just tell that something was different. Isabel at this point had had 3 surgeries, and each time I had kind of seen like a fight in her. And this time I showed up, she was really swollen, and I was just looking in her eyes, and I could just, it's the first time I looked at her and thought, oh, you're so tired. Like, you're so tired. She looked really sick. She looked really tired. The doctors were very worried. They were discussing in a corner. And then one of the doctors informed me that her liver specifically was looking really bad, and they think that she was an organ failure. So what that meant was that we had 2 choices. The first choice was that we could just let things happen naturally. And most likely they said that she would pass from a cardiac event, which could be painful if unplanned, and that she could pass when we were not there. I asked them that when they expected that, like, her lifespan to be, and they said no more than 2 weeks. So then the second option was for us to plan to remove her life support.
Wow. So sorry.
Okay. And that was a terrible decision to make as a parent. Thankfully, the palliative care team worked with us. They work with so many families that go through this, and they gave us the support that we needed in weighing out this decision. And we decided that we wanted to remove life support and control her end of life so that she wouldn't pass with any sort of pain. She'd also never been outside, and so the hospital helped us plan her end of life to be outside. And so we had planned it out. It was about 2 weeks from the time they let us know to when we planned it. So for those next 2 weeks were really, really crucial for me and David to spend all the time with her. That was the first time I started leaving Elena when I went to the hospital, because I just wanted to be with Isabel. I wanted to spend all my time with her, and I was pretty much there 24/7 for 2 weeks. And I had so many moments where I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, I can't do this. But I had this realization that Izzy was about to go through this really scary thing that none of us had done, and I was her support system. So I thought, maybe the best thing you could give her as a mom is just guiding her through that really hard moment as lovingly as you can.
Yeah.
And so that is what we decided to do. And so on May 7th, Izzy passed in my arms. More props to David, because he gave me that gift of being able to hold her. It's important to note that her end of life was the first time that she was not intubated. So it was the first time she could breathe on her own
which was only for a few minutes. And it was the first time I could hold her in the way that I wanted to hold her. So I got to like hold her up here by my face, and I got to kiss on her and just hold a baby in the way that you would want to comfort them. And I got to do that. So her last day of life is the saddest day of my life, but it was also so happy because I got to finally hold my baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like such a one of those moments where, you know, because in a sense, you were able to be a mother in the way you fully wanted to be a mother.
Yeah.
And it was as she was leaving.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. I was actually thinking about this last night, and I was dissecting that a little bit. Something that was difficult about the hospital stay, and I think it's important to voice this because there's mothers right now who are going through it with their children. That was a huge wake-up call for me with Izzy in the cardiac unit. She wasn't the only baby there.
Right. There's
She
a
was one of
whole
many.
world that is going on while we're living our lives, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think part of what's so hard is you can't mother your baby the way that you want to. You know, I wasn't nursing her. I wasn't feeding her in any sort of way. I wasn't holding her. And so trying to just make sure that she was feeling that connection with me so that she could be comforted was very, very stressful.
Yes. Oh, I can imagine. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that being out of your control.
Absolutely. And it absolutely was out of my control. When we start talking about, you know, coming from our faith background, while Izzy was in the hospital, I was juggling a lot of different personalities, right? So many people were invested in her well-being. My parents, David's parents, siblings, and friends. And a lot of these people are still fully believing members. And so they had different opinions as to how we should approach certain things. For instance, my dad really wanted her to have a blessing from priesthood holders. And I told him no, absolutely not. So I did refuse that priesthood blessing for her.
For those who've never been a parent before, you know, it's probably hard to imagine what it's like to be a parent. Mm-hmm. But theoretically, one might think, oh, well, you know, you were only with her for a matter of months. You can't even possibly bond to a child in 4 months like you could to a kid who is 5 years old or 10 years old or 20 years old or 30 years old. Can you talk about what type of bond you had with Izzy and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. And honestly, before I had kids and had gone through this experience, I might have had some of the same ideas. The pregnancy. We have to go back to the pregnancy. Twin pregnancy is killer. We were in survival mode, me and the girls together, just surviving. My oldest twin, Elena, was like so chill in the pregnancy. She just like hung out in my pelvis area and like didn't give me any trouble. But me and Izzy were like in it. We were bonded. I felt her all of the time. We called her Busy Izzy. And it was kind of a joke because you know, I had to go in for a lot of ultrasounds, and it was important that she stay still. So they image her to try to, you know, provide her with the care that we needed. And no, like, girlfriend was not about it. She moved around all the time. It was a joke between the nurses and a joke between me. And I just felt very bonded and connected to her personality. In reference to being in the hospital after, so I cannot like express enough the fact that you're feeling your baby all the time. And besides the fact that you're feeling your baby all the time, there's just something about the hormones when you're pregnant is you're thinking about them all of the time. I thought about the girls all the time. I thought about Isabel all of the time. And when she was born, that didn't stop. Even when I wasn't with her, I was thinking about her all of the time. When they are really young, I'm very lucky that she lived to be 4 months, because when they're really young, they they're just figuring out the world. They come in like blind as a bat, they can't hear very well. Newborns have no idea what's going on. And so they don't necessarily emit a huge amount of personality, but right around 3 or 4 months they do. And my Isabel was really fun. She was feisty. She'd let you know when she didn't like something. But she was really sweet. I have this really beautiful video. If anybody wants to go to my Instagram, there is a video of her on there, and I shared it because it's just so beautiful. It's one of the times we were kind of giving her a sponge bath and massaging her head. She really loved it, and she's just looking up. And you can see this little twinkle in her eyes, and a mom knows what that means, and it means that they're happy and they love you and they're sweet. Yeah. And she would give us that look often in the last month of her life, and especially when we held her. The best thing about the last 2 weeks of her life was that we got to hold her as much as we wanted, which was amazing. And she loved it. She would put up a fight anytime we'd put her back in the bed. And when I say put up a fight, that looks different for a child like Isabel. It doesn't mean kicking and thrashing and screaming. She actually couldn't cry because she's intubated, but there's monitors on the side of her, and she has numbers. And if those numbers go up, it's bad. And if they go down, it's fine. And anytime you'd put her down, her numbers would beep, 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 beep. And we'd have to settle her down a little bit. So she wanted to be held by us all of the time. That bond was definitely there. They also were able to lessen some of her medication, and so more of her personality was able to shine. So, yeah, I can't explain why the bond's there, but it just is, and it's there forever.
Yeah, I love that you brought out this idea of, bonding before she was born. I think, hey, pregnancy is different for everyone, right? There are very individual experiences, and for many it's really, really physically and psychologically difficult. But I do feel toward my children this idea of like, I knew you before you met the world. Yeah. Like we had our time, where it was really just me and you. Yeah. And so I love that you brought that out, because I do think there can be bonding there. There can be getting to know a personality there. Yeah. And so anyway, I really appreciate you kind of talking about that and talking about all this and being willing to relive it for us as part of your story. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's really kind. I think my motivation, because I've questioned my purpose a lot since everything happened with Isabel. And it's what I said before. I mean, there's families right now, all over the world that are going through this. It's been very eye-opening. And they're not alone. Like, I don't want anyone to ever feel like they are alone. This is the worst thing that could happen to somebody, but there is life after. I don't want anyone to feel hopeless.
Yeah, and I don't want this question to seem indelicate, but I'm just trying to empathize, and I can't imagine loving this baby. Like I think I would want the baby to pass, then be forced to make the decision, or to confront making the decision to consciously de-intubate or whatever it is, right, and have the baby pass consciously, because then it would have been my decision that led to that. Yeah. But clearly it was an intentional decision on your part. But I'm suffocating just thinking about making that decision.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and what you voiced is what a lot of people feel inside and maybe don't always voice truly. I thought about that too. I remember before I ever had the girls, I used to be a very nervous mother. Like I would check the doors a million times before I go to bed, because my greatest fear was that I would do something that would lead to my child getting hurt. Like I left the stove on or something like that, and I would be the reason. Yeah. How do you live with being the reason
right? And that's exactly what the hospital was asking us if we wanted to do. Do you want to let nature take its course, or do you want to make the decision to control end of life? It was very scary, for sure, being that person to say, this is the day and time. But I said it before, and I'll go ahead and repeat it because it bears repeating, especially if anybody else is out there having to make this decision, which is totally possible. What made me lean towards it was twofold. First of all, it was a reality. It was a reality that Izzy was going to pass, like zero question. And we'd done all the things. We haven't talked in depth about how crazy her situation was. Her heart defect was extreme. There was no way she's going to, everyone would always say, well, can't she just get a heart transplant? Not easy. And also she never even would have been a candidate. Like the heart doctors let us know that she's not a candidate. We don't feel like it would be successful. So she was always going to have to live with the heart she had. And that wasn't the only issue she had. So when they told us her organs were failing, I mean, we knew it. And like I said, I saw it in her change of demeanor. We knew her end of life was near. And so what pushed me towards controlling it is like what I said, the only thing that would be worse than me being there, giving her the gift of love and support, would be her having to pass painfully without that love and support. So I always would have thought exactly kind of like what you said, but it actually gave me a lot of courage in making that decision that was the gift of motherhood that I could give her. That was the way I could be her mom, which seems so reverse, I know, but it was the only thing that I could give her. And I wasn't going to leave her alone.
She could have passed while you were sleeping at night or at soccer practice with your kids or whatever.
Yes. And I mean, she could have passed any time in the whole 4 months. She had 3 different surgeries. Every time she went back for one of those surgeries, we had to sign a thing that said she might not make it. And those were always hard. Those days were always hard. And then she made it through every time.
That's right.
So those are big decisions. So those are big moments. So thank you again, like Margie said, for being willing to share.
Yeah.
Really quickly, tying back to Mormonism a bit, by this point, y'all had lost your Mormon faith.
Yes.
And I think I remember reading in your outline that there were several people offering to give baby blessings to Izzy. And, there's a part of my brain that's like, yeah, whatever, maybe it'll work. Like at least allow it in case, but then I'm thinking about how Margie might feel about that sort of thing with her perspective now. And sometimes it could be a violent reaction of no thank you. And so what was it like to navigate those well-intended offers for priesthood blessings?
Oh my goodness.
Or any other things ward members or believing family members might say before she passed?
For sure. And emphasis on well-attended, because if any of my Mormon friends are listening, all of the support I had from my friends, Mormon and not, was all beautiful and always well-intended and always taken that way, for sure. And so many of my fully believing Mormon friends stepped up to the plate and were awesome. And so many of my friends who've never been Mormon or those who've exited the church, all the things. But a couple of things. So a couple of years ago, my brother got in a terrible accident when my parents were living in England. They lived there for a year. Fun. And he's not a member of the church anymore, or not active. And while he was in the hospital, he was really unable to voice wants and desires for a little bit. My dad had called, unbeknownst to all of us, church members to come and give him a blessing. Didn't inform us, and they just showed up at the hospital when me and my other brother were there, kind of looking after him. And I remember stopping them in the hall and saying, "Hold on." Like they were 2 of our very good family friends, so I was very happy they were here to see my brother. But I said, "Hold on, like I don't know that he wants this." And so I was just like, just give me a second. I felt very important that he should consent. And so I went in there and asked him. I think he thought I was a little silly. He's like, "Yeah, that's fine. They can come in and do their thing." And I'm like, "Great, do it." But it's interesting that you brought that up, because I did feel, and I felt this way also in childhood, that so many times I was blessed or things were done to me kind of without consent.
Right.
So when it came to Izzy, I was surprised to feel that I had no ties to the church in my heart or my mind. None. I wondered, and I think many friends also wondered this, they kind of expressed this to me. They wondered if I would return to my faith because of this. It did absolutely the opposite. It actually confirmed for me that I was good. I was good. I didn't feel the need. I didn't feel like it was going to benefit my life or Izzy's life in any way. I actually officially wrote to resign my membership while she was in the hospital. Because I was like, this is it.
Yes.
So explain that, because there's this saying, there's no atheists in foxholes, that when you're facing death, or in this case, death of a child, that's when you're going to be even neurologically or psychologically most inclined to want to cling to belief,
Right.
just as a coping mechanism.
Of course. Yes. And I would have thought that's how I would react. And don't get me wrong, the struggle was there. It's still there. And we can talk more about that later in reference to where I feel like Izzy is, or afterlife, or things like that. I have a few experiences, but yeah, the opposite was true. And before, for the first year after my faith crisis, I remember, or when I had exited the church, I kind of remember still feeling a tiny tinge of fear in the back of my mind, like, maybe I made the wrong choice. And I just, whatever. I remember when I got like my helix piercing in my ear, I was like freaking out. I was like having Mormon hell dream, and I was like, how is this still living with me?
The spooky Mormon hell dream?
Yes, the spooky Mormon hell dream. I'm like, oh my gosh. And this was years after. So it just kind of lives in the back
Conditioning,
there.
that's right. And when you're vulnerable, when you're vulnerable, or then the conditioning kicks in.
Exactly. And so I really thought that I was going to experience a lot of that, and I did not. And that was surprising. And I can't tell you why. I just felt kind of resolved in my outlook on life at that point. If Izzy taught me anything, it was to just really value the life that we have, to stop focusing on what will and instead focus on what is. That's literally the opposite of what they teach you in the church, right?
Yes.
Eat, drink, and be merry. And here I am telling you, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you might die. Eat, drink, and be merry. Like, I soaked in every single minute I had with my child, because I knew that any minute could be the last. And because of that, every minute was precious. And I didn't really think too much about what was going to happen after. When the blessings were offered, I said no, because of what I said before. I was resigned to feel good about that this was not going to be helpful. But more importantly, I felt very protective of Izzy. Like, there was no way for her to consent. She was also very sensitive to touch. She had things hooked up to all over her body. She had that tube in her. There would be times when I would touch her and she would freak out, and I would know, okay, like, you don't want that right now because you might be uncomfortable. I was not going to let some two random men come into her hospital room and put their hands on her head when they don't know her. And she's not familiar with them. I was just so protective of her. Like, that was not going to happen. And I know that those men would have been well-intentioned, no question, but it wasn't going to happen.
And for judgy Mormons out there, just think about, what does it say about your God if he won't bless Izzy of his own accord, if he's got blessings to give, that he's going to withhold the healing of Izzy if the right two men don't come at the right time and say the right words and put the right oil on her, versus him just getting off his celestial rear end and healing her of his own accord, right?
Exactly.
Or allowing a mother's power to do it.
Or even better, yeah.
Oh my gosh, Margie, like nail on the head. Because I wrote about this a little bit in her outline, and I'm always getting judged by my dad about like man hating. I don't hate men. So let's like put that out there. I do not. I actually love men. I think men are beautiful and amazing people. But I am very like woman empowered these days. And when I found out I was having two girls, it became like, woo, through the roof, right? And it's important to mention that during Izzy's little 4 months that she had here, the most important people in her life, besides David, who was there like basically every day, except when he was working, he was there as much as he could be. But besides David, the most influential people in her life were absolutely women. Like, out of the question. It was me. It was her twin sister. Like, her twin sister and her were very bonded. They had spent the whole pregnancy together. Every time Elena was there, Izzy's vitals would be really positive. She definitely noticed that she was there. And then my mom would come all the time as well. And on top of that, my mother-in-law, Izzy's other grandmother, was there a lot. And those women went out of their way to make sure that they were there for her. And I hate to say it, but the men in her life did not. And I can't tell you why they made the choice not to be there with her as much. But her power was really fueled by women. The love brought to her room, the support brought to her room was mostly powered by women.
Were you tempted to say a prayer to heal her?
So I don't really pray these days, but I did start meditating for my own personal health. And I just, especially at the very beginning when I could barely even touch her because she was so uncomfortable. So there would be times I'd go in there, I'd just barely be holding her finger. And so I would think, well, how can I make her feel that I'm here? And I would just want to be the most positive energy. So I would try very much to meditate and think positively and just bring joy and a lack of anxiety, because I'm a very anxious person, into the room. And over time, I felt like that meditation did almost turn into a type of prayer. Mm-hmm. I didn't know, in reference to my belief system, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know that there's a God. I don't, but I'm not against it. There could be. So it's not that I was meditating or praying to something, but I was definitely having a lot of introspection during that time.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the times on my mission where I was asked to give some healing blessing, and I always felt inadequate. It always felt awkward. And then I'd give the blessing, and I never had any idea that it actually would do anything.
Right.
And there's something so beautiful and powerful about having, I don't know if it's the faith, but the wisdom to just let it be as the mom, let it be what it's going to be. And like you said, just love every minute you have with Izzy.
For sure. And I mean, there were times, where I would get into spaces where I would just be like, well, I'm going to wish her better. And it didn't work. And then you had to grapple with the fact that it didn't work. It's interesting that you say that, because I remember there was a moment a couple of years ago where it dawned on me that men who have the priesthood don't feel the spirit any differently than women.
No, they don't.
They don't feel any other sort of power or voice. It's the same. I remember, but growing up, I really did think it was different. And I had to ask David, I had to say well, what do you hear in your head when blah, 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 so-and-so happens, when you give a blessing or whatever? And he told me, and I'm like, well, that's the exact same as me.
Yeah, it's just you make shit up.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So,
and you wonder what's going to happen.
Right. And so to your point and to Margie's point, I truly didn't feel like any stranger coming into her room was going to do more for her than what was already be done for her by the people who loved her the absolute most.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's this moment that many of us will find ourselves, because death is part of life, right? Where, how would I express it? It's kind of like you can feel the reality turn, where your hopes are checked and you're getting data from experts or people who know.
Yeah.
And there's that temptation to slip out of reality, to slip into a different space of hope or desperation, or just draw it out and and these are all tricky places to be. I don't mean to oversimplify, but having been in a situation with someone who's dying and that's where this is going. There are things that I think become very clear, or can, in those moments where it's you're weighing whether to fight or not to fight, and what's the cost to the person that you're asking to do the fighting, and is it for you or is it for them?
Yes.
And then also, once you are fully, accepting, like you said, reality, this is real. Then how do I engage with what is before me in real love for this person? Yeah. How can I use this time then, if this is where we're headed? How do I want to show up? How do I want to love? So I just leave it all. It's all out there. I've given everything I can with what's left with this person here. And that's what I feel from you, is I feel, even when you're talking about it, that you hit a moment where in some way it became clear, and what emerged from you, that clarity of what is most important, to Izzy. And we talked about you having that moment to mother, but Izzy got to feel you mother too before she left this world, Anyway, I just really feel that from you, and the courage in these moments that we have to actually face what is. And we can talk about death all day. We can talk about, but until you witness someone's last breath, you know, and what that means and what you allow it to mean for you moving forward, it can be very different than what you think, you know?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And I say a lot now, like life is the great teacher. I'm learning all the time. This has been the greatest teaching experience of my life thus far. It's taught me to become comfortable with death, because it's part of the life experience. It's something I wish actually people would talk about more with comfort, especially in like Western society. We really struggle. Like it's so feared. But it's like what you said, like when death is a reality, how do you show up and show love and respect the fact that this is part of life? And how do you handle it gracefully? I had a really interesting experience. This was after Izzy had passed, and one of the things I struggled with was if we should have done as many surgeries as we did to her, because we were just fighting so hard to save her. I mean, she's going to live, for a long time. And I look back and I'm like, man, those were so uncomfortable for her. But we did that, and, she lived as long as she could, and I'm glad we had her for as long as we could. But I was just really fighting to figure out how I could have done things different. I was bargaining. That's what I was doing. That's what part of the grief cycle.
Right.
I was bargaining, even after she passed, even after it was a reality, yes, that she was gone. I was still bargaining in my brain, like, how could I have done this differently? Or if I do this, could this happen? And then a friend of mine, she lost her 14-year-old daughter right around the same time as Izzy passed from a cancer struggle. And I followed along with her story closely because I was feeling it very strongly. And I got to speak to this little girl's grandma who was very much involved in her life. And she told me a little bit about her. And because this little girl was 14, she got to verbalize things. And her mom told her, or her grandmother told me, that this girl said, "I'm not scared to die. I just don't want to be in pain anymore." That really helped heal me a little bit, because I realized that Izzy had really led quite a painful life. And so even though you don't want to think of death as a good thing, I wish with all my might that she was still here. If I could give my own life for her, I would do it in a second. But she was in a lot of pain, and it helped me feel peace about her time of ending and the way it happened.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, and oftentimes I think, and this is tricky and it's complicated, and I don't want to oversimplify it all, but this is why it's so difficult in weighing. There's kind of an assumption that the worst thing is death, that the worst thing is, but when you witness suffering, or we have questions of quality of life over just years and years of someone and what it takes to have them live. And that is where it gets really complicated, is suffering is real. And sometimes, that death option, it becomes very clear that death is not the worst thing, and that's tricky, and it's individual, and it's, very complicated within families, talking all that out. But just really hearing what you're saying, witnessing high levels of suffering.
Yes. Well, and something that you said reminded me, the truth is, like, there's so much about this death experience we don't know and we do not understand. Yeah. And we're not going to understand it. And it requires finding comfort in not knowing. Yeah. Like in that uncomfortable space of not knowing. One of the greatest lessons I've learned since leaving Mormonism is trying to find comfort and being okay with not knowing. Like, I don't know what death is like. I don't know where Izzy is. I don't know what she's experiencing. I can hope for so many things, but I don't know, and I have to find comfort in that. If someone were to ask me, well, how do you find comfort in that? I go back to just being grateful for the time that we did have, the good experiences that we did have. And I can't stress that enough, because Izzy just being born and being my daughter was enough. Like that was enough because she was this whole little person and her life had significance.
Yeah.
It was 4-month life. It was short, but it was significant. And that to me means everything. And so when I struggle with the fact that I don't know what's going to happen, I go back to remembering how grateful I am that I got to know her and how much I appreciate her life.
You list in your outline, I think, several things that well-intended Mormons would say to you.
Yeah.
Do you want to address any of those just as a way to coach people
Yes.
for less helpful and maybe
More helpful
things to say or not say?
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing it up because it's the whole reason I'm here. Is to, if you were to ask me, why did you choose to do Mormon stories? I would say it's for education, to help people know how to handle like this grief experience, most especially if you're grief adjacent, and then also support. So for those going through it to know that you're not alone, that you're here, that I'm here for you. Okay. So a lot of things that people would say, and of course, always well-intended.
Do you want me to read each one?
Yes. Read
the
up,
first one you wrote is, I don't know how someone could handle this without faith.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, already I'm just like cringing.
Yes. So I don't know how someone could handle this without faith. I remember hearing that and thinking, well, I guess I don't have faith and I'm handling it. So I didn't know how to respond. It put me in this awkward situation of saying, well, I don't know. But what I would say to that person is instead of saying that, and that my answer is going to be the same for probably all of these, but instead of saying something like that, instead just saying, I'm here for you. Like, I love you. Do you want to talk? So just being a space of support and comfort for that person's own experiences and not putting assumptions on them. The assumption being like, I don't think you're handling it well because you're not faithful. Or maybe if you were, yes, if you were faithful, your problems could be solved, which is also, I cannot express like more fervently, is not true. There are plenty of people who have faith who really struggle in grief.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. And that is normal.
Sometimes more so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, the second thing you wrote was, we know she's still here, meaning after she's passed,
Yes.
we know she's still with us. Or I've even had people go, they came to me in a dream to tell you that they're doing okay.
Right. That one is harder for me to handle because I would like for nothing more than to sit here and tell you that I know where my daughter is. I can feel her, and I feel her presence. The truth is, I don't really feel that. And I remember when she died, I felt very strongly that she was gone. Gone. And there, with the exception of one thing, and I will tell this experience, and it's weird, and I can't explain it, and it's feeling comfort in the unknown, like I can't explain it. After we brought her back from the garden, I carried her back. They had wheeled me out with her and they wanted to wheel me back to the room. And I said, no, I want to carry my daughter. And she had already passed at this point. So I carried her, and her body was beautiful because this was the first time she got to be unhooked from all the things. And I got to see her full face. So it was like such a treat to be able to take her back to her room and wash her and dress her. She had never been in clothes. She had only ever been in a diaper and blankets because they needed to have access to her body. So that was such a beautiful gift to be able to do. And I remember looking at her and thinking, she looks so cute and so perfect after we washed her and we dressed her. And the nurse said, you need to take a picture. And I said, I'm not, that's morbid. And she said, do it. Take a picture. And I did. And I'm so happy I have that picture. So for anyone who can't understand why moms do that, I'll tell you it's because it's the only picture I have of her where she's just her. And there's so many moms that the only pictures they have of their baby is postmortem. And so those pictures are really important. But I had this moment after we had dressed her and we finally had to leave the hospital. That moment was the worst moment, leaving, knowing we weren't coming back because she was gone. I heard a voice behind, this is going to sound like a testimony meeting, so just buckle up, everybody. I heard a voice behind me as if it was a real person. The voice was not the voice of a baby or a grown woman. It sounded like a little girl. And the voice said, Mom, you're going to be happy again. And I even turned around because I thought someone was behind me. And then I realized it was just a voice. And I was like, that is weird. And I haven't read into it at all. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it means. Mm-hmm. It's just that voice said it. And in that moment, I thought, I don't see how that's possible. But since then, over the months, I see that it is possible to find happiness and moments of joy, even after grief like that. And so I'm happy I had that experience. But outside of that, I don't feel an Isabel presence. Mm-hmm. And so when people say that, it's very difficult because then I have to re-question myself. Like, should I be feeling that? It can make me a little angry when people say it because I'm like, you don't know. Like, stop telling me what you know. You don't know. You're not her mom.
Yeah.
So a few other things you had wrote, I'll just read them all. We know she's in a better place. These are things not to say.
Yes.
We know she's in a better place. Aren't you grateful families can be together forever?
Yeah.
And this isn't goodbye. It's see you later.
Right. All of those things are a go-to that people say, right? Well-intended, out of comfort, but they are kind of like the worst thing you could say. We know she's in a better place. That's the worst because it's like her best place that she could ever be is with me, right?
Yeah.
So,
what's a better place?
What's a better place? And so it's really hard to hear that when you're grieving and you're feeling that loss. It's not necessarily what you want to hear. I think some people find comfort in things like that. But you don't want to just throw that out to somebody who is grieving. The whole families can be together forever. Well, that's not my faith system anymore. And I don't know if I believe that. Mm-hmm. So sometimes statements like that can actually make me feel really sad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, the best thing you can say to somebody, what happens, when you hear somebody's story, you just feel in a space of awkwardness where you don't know what to say and you want to say something. For so many people, it's very easy to fall back on statements like this. But really what you need to do is just hold space for that person. Give them a moment. Say you're there for them. Say that you support them. They may not even react well to you saying that in that moment. But if you keep showing up for them, you keep supporting them, you keep showing them love, you keep just being an open space for them to talk if they need it, they'll remember it and it'll mean the world to them in the end.
Yeah.
So the last part that I want to make sure we get to does emerge from that voice you heard. Mm-hmm. Can you be happy again? And can you talk us through, I know you have strong feelings about the stages of grief and what it means to grieve and how maybe sometimes even religious faith can prevent proper grieving and then healing. So let's make sure you have all the time you want to talk about your grieving and healing processes.
Yeah. It's important to note that everybody grieves differently. I can't explain that as to why. It just depends on the person and their circumstances and what they were going through. For me, with Izzy, I had a whole pregnancy almost and 4 months to kind of be prepared for her passing. Because as soon as we knew that she had a congenital heart defect, we were preparing that it was possible she could pass. So my mind was already doing the prep work that it needed to make this process a little bit smoother. For people who lose suddenly, I really feel for them because it's like hitting a brick wall. Mm-hmm. There's no way around it. The minute I heard that my daughter had 2 weeks to live, like, bam, I've just never felt that feeling. I'll never feel it again. But it's important to give yourself a lot of grace while you're grieving and to go through these stages appropriately. Some of the stages, hopefully I can remember all of them, right? You have anger and you have denial, you have bargaining and depression and acceptance. Those don't happen in order or chronologically. They can happen at all different times and on repeat. I'm a year out from losing my daughter and I still find myself bargaining sometimes and returning back to that. I think it's very helpful when you're grieving to know that these feelings are very natural. It's very very natural to feel anger. It's very natural to feel denial and depression and bargaining. It's about finding your support system to help you through those moments so that when you keep on returning to those moments, because you will keep returning to those moments, because grieving can be a lifelong process, you'll know how to get through it. For me, the number one thing that has helped me through this is my family, my friends, and the support system that I have. Like, that has been it for me. That is what is healing me. It's the people showing up in my life and saying, I love you. I don't care if you sit here and cry all day. I don't care if you sit here and don't say anything. I'm here for you. Yeah. Anything that you need. That's what's gotten me through. Definitely mothering my children has been a huge part for me too. Earlier in the story, we talked about my grandmother losing her son and my dad feeling like he kind of lost her as a mom. And I remember when I knew Izzy was going to pass, I thought, I'm not going to do that to my kids. I know my dad was really hurt and I know my grandma couldn't help it. But because of that experience that I had and learning about that, I knew that I needed to show up for my kids. And that's really helped me. Having Elena being the surviving twin is huge. It's huge because she's kind of built in purpose. Another thing that really happens when you lose someone is you just lose all purpose. You kind of have this moment of, what am I doing? Where do I go from here? Especially with a baby, your purpose was built in when you became pregnant with that baby. You were going to have that baby and then take care of that baby. And then when they're stripped from you, what do? You have to find something else to keep you going. Elena has helped me a lot with that because I had to take care of her and wanted to take care of her, was naturally devoted to take care of her. But another thing that I'm finding incredible purpose in is helping other people. The reason I like that purpose, and if I were to say to anybody who's searching for something to kind of give them motivation, it would be search for something that you can always do even as things fluctuate.
Independent of other people.
Yes.
Right?
So I can always help. I can always choose to be a positive motivator or someone who helps other people, even when I'm not mothering anymore, or even when I'm not working, or if I'm not in this job or that job, I can always do that. So for me, that's what I'm really dialing into. And I found that to be very helpful.
Yeah.
Because kids move away.
Yes, they do. And I don't even want to think about that, John, because I'm like so dialed into my kids right now.
Easy.
Listen, take it from us.
Yes, yes. And this whole experience, I believe it or not, I used to never cry because I grew up with 3 brothers and you got like pummeled if you cried. So like, there's no crying in baseball kind of thing. But I cry at the drop of a hat now. I mean, anytime my kids do anything, I mean, they can just tell me that they love me and like, that's it. I'm done, But one of the things you were talking about is sometimes religious institutions or systems can really hinder grieving when they don't offer solutions like what we were just talking about. And sometimes, and there's a talk that I had brought up that Elder Anderson gave in the fall general conference.
This is a Mormon apostle,
yes.
Neil Anderson.
So it's fall 2024.
Fall 2024. And the title is something about hope. And the whole idea is about how, we find hope in Jesus, and that's fine. But he really defines grief a little bit in that talk. And he gives 2 examples. He gives examples of a family who'd fallen away from the church and they lose somebody, and a family that was still in the church and they lost somebody. And how the talk kind of goes is the family that fell away from the church and lost somebody struggled. Whereas the family that stayed in the church and lost somebody did not struggle. They even actually found joy. I really hated that idea because it makes you think that I especially hate it for people who are still in the church. I actually think a talk like that puts the burden more on people who are fully believing still, because it makes them think, if I lose somebody, I can't grieve. Because if I'm grieving, am I not righteous? If I'm grieving, am I not faithful enough? If I'm grieving, do I not believe enough? That is so far from the truth.
What's the benefit of healthy grieving? versus just denial and avoidance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to like walk through the tunnel to see the light. Like that's such a cliche example. But you have to work through these things in a process. You have to kind of like let it out, and that is painful and that is hard. And if you don't, then you're always going to be dealing with it. And I mean, you might always deal with it anyway, but it becomes easier. Like I have moments all the time where these things resurface and I have to kind of work through it again. Yep. I have to remind myself of my purpose. I have to lean on the people that give me support. Therapy is an amazing resource. I cannot say that enough, especially a good therapist that you jive with. Proper help. If you keep on burying it, it's going to rear its ugly head in other ways. It's going to debilitate your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is it glib to say there's healing and growth and wisdom that can come through grieving?
Absolutely. It's not glib at all. And in fact, that's the life lesson that I've learned. That's why I value this experience of understanding what it's like to be close to death with somebody. It's made life brighter. That doesn't mean I'm happier all the time. So I don't want people to mistake that, because there's despair there, I mean, the more you love, the more you grieve. So there's an amazing amount of despair, but because I understand that life is such a gift now, and Izzy's experience taught me this. I don't feel like I knew this before. I know people say it all the time, but I didn't feel it in my heart. And now I feel it in my heart. Life is this really beautiful gift. And there are so many amazing things about it. There's also a lot of crappy stuff, like a lot, but there's beautiful things. And those are the things that I strive to look for.
Mm-hmm. You wrote in your outline that you see Izzy as one of your greatest teachers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And she always will be. Sometimes I don't always like to phrase it that way because I don't like.
Did I say it wrong?
No, you said it perfectly because that's how I said it, right? So you're just quoting me. But sometimes people will say, oh, this person existed because they taught me this lesson.
Yeah, that's not why they existed.
Right. And I want people to understand that when I say Izzy's my greatest teacher, it doesn't diminish her existence. She exists, just her existing was enough. Like, if I have to learn anything, I have to learn that on my own. I don't need a child passing to teach me that lesson. Mm-hmm. But she did teach me a lot. This whole experience taught me so much. I'll tell you, I've never been a happier mom than since losing Izzy. I mean, things that I used to complain about, I just don't anymore. Like a baby crying. I mean, what a blessing to hear a baby cry. It's hard sometimes, I know, but also they're there. They're crying because they're there. Changing diapers, getting up in the night, things like that. Any milestone that my kids have, I'm just really happy to be there with them.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful.
Yeah.
You mentioned all the women who helped in her care and passing, and then you made the bold decision when maybe there was some expectation or pressure to have a Mormon-themed funeral. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that really quick?
I do. I think it's interesting, and I don't know if people know. I mean, in Mormonism, there is kind of a cultural funeral that you stick to. It would probably take place in a church building, and it's almost like they approach it almost like they do with baptisms. A lot of times it's priesthood leaders giving talks. They actually usually advise that it be more spiritually based, right? Teaching more doctrinal, spiritual type lessons at the funeral than it being
about the person.
About the person, yes. So,
and that there's a full plan of salvation talk at the end of the funeral, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my dad was really helpful after Izzy passed. The business of death is very difficult if anybody has gone through it, like finding a gravesite and, life insurance and paying for everything. It's very hard. My dad helped a lot with that. I'm so grateful that he helped with that. But he really wanted to have more of a Mormon style funeral. And I got very upset when he suggested that either he, my father-in-law, or the bishop preside over her funeral. I mean, I was just beside myself, really upset about that. Because I thought, why? I mean, first of all, why do any of you need to preside over her funeral? The bishop didn't even know her. And he's a wonderful man, but he doesn't know her. And then my dad and my father-in-law were there for Izzy, but not anywhere near as much as the grandmothers were. I mean, night and day. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to let you step in the name of priesthood, power and authority to change how my daughter's funeral is going to be conducted. So I felt very strongly I wanted it to just be about Izzy, totally focused on Izzy. I mean, the whole room was pink. We had pink tablecloths. Her casket was pink. All her flowers were pink. It was all about Isabel. And we just talked about our life and our love for her. And we sang the songs that we would sing to her in the hospital, the songs that she loved.
What were, do you?
Well, now you're going to make me cry, John.
Sorry. You don't have to.
No, it's okay. So we did sing one hymn, and it's called Softly and Tenderly. I actually really love that hymn. And we did sing that to her at the hospital. So we sang her that one, but her favorites ones were You Are My Sunshine and a song called Always by Patsy Cline. I had a friend of mine, two friends of mine perform it. It was so beautiful. Yeah, if you've never listened to the song, you should. It's beautiful.
My mom used to sing to me, You Are My Sunshine.
Yeah. You know, that the songs feel, something that's been hard for me since is singing to Elena. I sing to all my babies when they were little, and I've really struggled to sing with her, but I've made it a goal to work on it. And I have found some healing. Sometimes I can't return to those songs, and other times I can. And when I can, I feel healing for sure.
I think one of the questions I have for you is around, something we hear as people transition away from, especially like high demand religions or high control, is this fear comes up, I think, immediately about death.
Yeah.
At least I've witnessed that in my coaching practice. Almost immediately it goes to like, what am I going to do when my mother dies? What am I going to do when it's just something that really, I think it's very common to have it come up. And I think, so I'd be curious as to if that had ever entered your mind before your experience as part of the existential kind of piece.
Yeah.
And kind of how you think about it now, having gone through, I think, a death and not necessarily, it sounds like, reattaching to certainty and knowing.
Yeah.
As a way to kind of comfort in that way. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, it's such a good thing to bring up because when you're in Mormonism, death really isn't that scary, right? For those who don't know, Mormons have a very clear doctrine about what the afterlife looks like. And when you're fully believing, it's extremely comforting. And I remember when I was in Mormonism, that was actually one of my favorite things about it, is I felt like I had so much comfort in the idea of what an afterlife looks like. And that's very specific, but like there's basically 3 different types of heaven. And if you're the best, you go to the best and you live on forever and you're really kind of set up for success and your family will be with you. So then I remember going through my existential crisis, and that was one of the hardest things to tackle. Absolutely. I was terrified. Truly. I had a moment of crazy despair where I just felt very dark. I didn't know. And a lot of members, I know, if they heard this, they would say, oh, well, come back. Like, we know. But you have to understand, I couldn't come back even if I wanted to. I don't believe it anymore. Yeah. It's not there. There's that moment in Wicked. Now I'm making like silly analogies, but where Elphaba is like realized that the wizard is fake. And Glinda's like, you can still be with the wizard.
You can still be with the wizard.
Yes. And she's like, I know, but I don't want it. I can't want it anymore because
I don't want it. I can't want it anymore.
Exactly. Bum, 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 bum.
Bum, bum, bum,
Yeah. I love that John's like here for this analogy. This is perfect. So, I really had that moment where it was like the mask is off.
Yeah.
I know what's behind the wizard. It's not real. So even if I wanted to believe it, I couldn't. And that's why it's not comforting. Mm-hmm. So it's no longer a comfort option. It's not even an option anymore. And I know a lot of members of the church really struggle to understand why. Like, just come back. You'll feel comforted. I couldn't even if I wanted to. So I was in a very dark space. I really feel like Izzy's experience took me out of that. I really cannot stress how much I value life now. Mm-hmm. And I understand that death is a part of life. I still think it's a little scary, but I think it's the calling that we eventually all have to go to.
Yeah. It's here, huh?
Yeah. And so all you can do is be as courageous and graceful as you can. I'm not perfect at this. I fail constantly, daily, but how I try to approach each day is I'm going to try my best today. Yeah. And I'm going to try to make today a day that was worth living for me, for my children. And then if I mess up, then if I get it tomorrow and I wake up the next day, I'm going to do that again. And if I don't, I hope that I can look back and say, I tried really hard. I tried to make today great. I think I've lived my life as well as I could.
Yeah.
I think I've loved people. And I find comfort in that, living a life that way.
Yes. Okay, my last question is around, it feels like one of the shifts that we make as we move away from, again, high demand, high control religion, is away from certainty and control into this place of uncertainty. And I think you've lived that, boy, in so many ways in your story, right? And also, one of the things that is clearly deconstructed for you is this transactional way of living. Like, if I give everything, if I just show up with X, Y, Z, then maybe I'll get protection, or maybe I'll be spared these things, or maybe my child will be healed, or maybe, and I think that's something that is part of the uncertainty, right? That deconstructs and we realize, actually, that isn't quite the way it works, Yeah. What do you do to ground yourself as you live in a world that's uncertain? What are some things that you have found to be helpful to try to, live with that now?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. And of course, I'm failing at this all the time, right? We all are. We're all trying to find our ways to grapple through. But I do feel like there are things that have helped me personally. And I'm going to start sounding like a very spiritual yogi type person, but meditation has been huge. In the last few years, my anxiety has gone through the roof. I've become a very anxious person and I feel it rise. I'll kind of start to have a panic attack and I've had to find self-managing ways to come down from it. So that's a really good example of that's a moment of uncertainty. You can't predict always when your anxiety is going to rise, then you have to find ways to come down for it. For me, I do a series of breathing and meditation and it really truly helps, me for sure. But bigger than that, so being mindful of yourself, of your body, kind of connecting to your body, I truly believe in that. The whole meditation, I do a lot of yoga because yoga helps me become more in tune with myself and just feel at peace within myself. It's a moment of peace that I don't have when I step outside the door always. So I do love that. It's a small little thing that I can kind of control and get connected with myself. So finding a way to connect with your inner peace. So for me, that's yoga, that's meditating. But bigger than that, it's my support system, developing a support system. And if someone doesn't have a support system, I know that's really difficult because then how do you find that? I have found that there are friends that can be family. With the right friends, they can be family. Sometimes they can be better than family, depending on your family system. I've been so fortunate to find a really good support system of friends who have loved me both in the church and out of the church, both, who have loved me unconditionally and been there and showed up for them. So the uncertainty is always scary. There will be days I feel like I can't handle it. And my life is still very uncertain. First of all, we're never guaranteed tomorrow, but then I have a lot of things going on with my life personally, with my career and with my marriage where I don't know what the future is going to look like. And it's very scary. So I just try to take it one step at a time, lean on my support system. Your support system can also be therapy. That can be a support system. Lean on your support system and find ways to connect with your inner peace. That would be the recipe for me.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
And if your early years, your first half of life, were characterized by not wanting and silencing and sacrificing who you are to be what the church wanted you to be. What are you discovering now about who you are, what you want, and ways that you aren't going to necessarily self-sacrifice, but instead be your happiest or best self? Anything you're discovering as you integrate your innie and outie?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Such a good question, babe.
That is a wonderful question, and it's hard one to answer.
You don't have to have answers.
I do have a few.
Okay.
So I had a breakdown to my mom the other day. My mom's a very kind and supporting, caring person, and which is why this moment's kind of funny. I broke down to her. I was like crying, bawling, and I just said, "Mom, I wanted my life to be extraordinary," and I was just crying, and she just started laughing, which is so unlike her. And so I was like, "What's going on?" And she said, "Jennie," because I said, this is what I said. I said, "I'm 37, and I wanted my life to be extraordinary," talking as if my life is ending or something. And she just said, "Jennie, you're so young." She's like, "Your life can be extraordinary." And so I would say my theme really is about living every day to the fullest. Whereas before it was absolutely about sacrifice to reach a fullness. Now it's about making my here and now the fullest, best ever. I'm definitely trying to return to things I'm passionate about personally. I'm trying to rock the motherhood thing because that is very important to me. But I love writing. That's what I went to school for. I'm trying to ramp up my writing again. I love that. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my career. I want to be a successful, independent person who can take care of her children. So I'm just working every day on those goals. So it's about living life to the fullest every single day.
Yeah.
I'm not always successful at that. So that's important. I fail at it daily.
It is likely a life's practice.
Yes. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, Margie and I were reading your outline, and we're like, she's a writer.
Oh. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I was like very stressed out about writing that outline because I was trying not to.
It was only 7 pages.
I know, only 7 pages. And I was trying not to go back and like edit it too much because I'm like, this will take weeks if I do this.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that. I do love writing. It was my passion. I've always steered towards things that are kind of high feeling. Like when I was really into performance, I went to school. Eventually when I was at school, I decided I want to do writing, and I was really passionate about it and still am. And that's also a big reason why I loved teaching. I mean, it's very high feeling to be a teacher. You impact people daily, and I got to participate in things that I loved.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Would you mind sharing with us at least your Instagram account? Because I get a sense you've got a little bit of a following there, and you do have videos and photos about your baby.
I do.
So for those who are interested.
Yeah, for people who are interested in following along, especially since recently I've changed my Instagram to be more of a platform and space for people healing from grief. So if that's something you're interested in following along, it's J Latham Johnson. So Latham is a tough name to spell.
Latham, is
yes,
that right?
Latham, J Latham Johnson. And you'll see a lot of my story there. And I'll continue to share things about Izzy. If there's anyone out there, because I've seen this a lot on like the internet verse, right? People sometimes wonder why you might share stories like this openly. I find it to be very healing. And also, if you remember what I said, Izzy's life was so significant to me. It's very hard for that life to then just diminish from the world, to leave.
Yeah.
And I want people to know about her. I want people to see her. She was so cute. Like, I want people to see it.
You want the evidence that she existed. You
Like a
want it out
witness.
there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a witness to her.
Yeah, and that she was important. She's changed my life. Absolutely. And so that is why I share. That's the point. And if on the off chance someone can find the page and find it to be comforting, that's the goal. So if you'd like to follow along, of course, that's always helpful. Definitely helpful for the things that I'm trying to achieve. My long-term goal, I don't know how long-term it is. I'd love to start a foundation in her name. It's tricky to do. I'm starting the talks with people now, something nonprofit. I don't really know what it's going to look like, but a lifelong dream would be to be able to start some sort of nonprofit with Izzy's name on it that could help families of pediatric patients.
Yeah. And you do have a Substack. Do you want to share that, or would you?
Yeah, I do. It's called Navigating the Storm. And you can find all these links on my Instagram. Instagram's like the best place to go and just find all the links. I do have a Substack, and I've been sharing basically a written version of what we talked about here, but I also share other things. And I'm sure in the future it will change as well. In my past, I didn't write memoir type stuff at all. I always wrote fiction. That's what I was passionate about. And I'm still passionate about it, but I haven't found my way back to it quite yet.
I just started a Substack, so let's
Awesome.
Follow each other. How's that?
Yes, let's follow each other. That's the that's the best. Substack's really fun because it's writers, and it's kind of like diving into my universe.
It's better than Twitter. Shh.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree
for sure.
But anytime, and this, being on any sort of like social platform can feel very overwhelming because you're trying to manage all of the social platforms, and they're all so different.
Yeah, they really are. Mm-hmm. Well, what a beautiful and a powerful story, Jennie Latham Johnson. Margie and I can't thank you enough for your willingness to be vulnerable and to share your life and your husband's life and Izzy's life with all of us.
Yes.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about her. And so now think about this. Her legacy is on video here forever.
That's
hopefully. Right. Oh, and I should add, and this is important because I use this symbolism a lot. So her name was Isabel Blanche, and we called her Izzy B, our busy bee, because of how active she was in pregnancy. So anytime I think of Izzy, I think of bees. So you'll see a lot of bees. I'm wearing a bee today. And you'll see bees all over my stuff. And that is why, because it's Izzy. And I like bringing my Izzy power with me anytime I can.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jennie Latham Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us today. Thanks to Brooklyn for all she's doing behind the scenes. Thanks to all the Mormon Story staff. Thanks to all the donors that make this possible. We couldn't do it without you. And if you feel moved to become a donor, you can go to mormonstories.org and become a donor. There are other ways to help as well. Just liking this episode, subscribing to the channel, sharing this link with others, all helps get the word out and helps with engagement. Even commenting, asking questions, giving feedback, all that helps. So thanks to everyone who helps. And most importantly, just thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Thanks to Margie for being partner and co-host.
Absolutely.
And
happy to do it.
Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.